Okay, very good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bambuhai, Dobry день. On June the 2nd this year, we will celebrate the 45th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Russian Federation and the Republic of the Philippines since their establishment in 1976. To commemorate this date, the Embassy of the Russian Federation to the Republic of the Philippines initiated an online conference on Russia-Philippines bilateral relations, and we were happy to take on this initiative. The general objective of the conference is to summarize the key achievements of this long-standing relationship and to discuss the avenues for further cooperation in bilateral and region-wide frameworks like ASEAN-centered institutions. Today, we are privileged to host a number of distinguished speakers directly involved in the cooperation between the Philippines and Russia in various fields. This conference itself is a product of joint endeavor of MGIMO University and Foreign Service Institute of the Philippines. And special words of appreciation go to the Russian Embassy in Manila and the Philippines Embassy in Moscow. Needless to say that this conference would not be possible without contributions from the respective Russian and Filipino ministries and governmental structures. The conference will be co-moderated by me, Ekaterina Koldunova, Acting Director of ASEAN Centre in Gimor, and Ms. Luningning Camoying, Deputy Chief of Presidential Protocol in charge of Substantive Matters, Office of the Presidential Protocol. Before I pass the floor to Ms. Lu, could I kindly ask all the participants to please turn on the cameras and we will do the group photo before we proceed to the program itself. So, a group photo moment, please, and smile. Thank you very much. So let me now pass the floor to Ms. Camoying for the moderation of the first topic. Ms. Lu, the screen is yours, please.
Спасибо, Dr. Koldunova. Good afternoon to our colleagues in Manila and Dobre Utro to our friends in Moscow. I am pleased to be part of this important event, a celebration of friendship and cooperation between the Philippines and Russia, and more importantly, an effort to chart the future direction of the relations. The timing could not be any better given some trends. First, bilateral engagement is at an all-time high, resulting from a convergence of events, primarily the Philippines' deliberate decision from the top to elevate relations and Russia's own pivot to Asia. But political developments, particularly the upcoming leadership transition in the Philippines next year, could raise some questions of sustainability of the current upward trajectory of the relations. Second, geopolitical and geoeconomic environment in which our countries operate is shifting towards greater complexity and unpredictability. Competition among big powers is heightening, with Asia-Pacific being the main locus. And third, finally, the COVID-19 pandemic adds another layer to this complicated environment as talks of economic nationalism and deglobalization become more prominent. These factors will inevitably influence Manila's and Moscow's external policies and actions. While they may pose certain challenges, they could also present opportunities for deeper cooperation. So we are confident that our discussions today will generate insights on the way forward. Let us now jump into the first session on the achievements and prospects for Philippines-Russia diplomatic ties. It is my honor to introduce our first speaker, the Acting Undersecretary for Bilateral Relations and ASEAN Affairs of the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, Her Excellency Elizabeth P. Buensuceso. Undersecretary Buensuceso has been in the Philippine Foreign Service for over 4 decades, holding various positions that allowed her to influence directly the direction of the Philippines' engagement with Russia, bilaterally and within the context of ASEAN. She was the Philippines' permanent representative to ASEAN for 6 years, and prior to that, Assistant Secretary for European Affairs of the DFA. Excellency, ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lou. Good afternoon to colleagues in the Philippines, and good morning to our friends in Russia, particularly my good friend, Deputy Minister Igor Morgulov. How are you? Good to see you again. It was not so long ago when we had our political consultations, and Ambassador Soreta over there. Hello, Ambassador King. And of course, distinguished speakers and guests from the various pillars of Philippines-Russia cooperation, from the economic, cultural, education, parliamentary group. I think former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Alan Peter Karetana, will be speaking also this afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this very important event to commemorate the 45th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between our two countries. I would like to acknowledge the very kind and able moderatorship of Mrs. Luningning Camoying Valdez here. When I was Assistant Secretary for European Affairs, she was one of my brightest, most brilliant officers, so she still is. And when I retired, she said, I've been in the Foreign Service for 4 decades. She failed to mention that I joined the Foreign Service when I was 12 years old. I'm honored to have been invited here. In this conference, one of the many activities planned this year to celebrate the 45th anniversary of our diplomatic relations, we will discuss the success of our bilateral relationship and explore means to further deepen our partnership. The beginning of relations between the Philippines and Russia can be traced back to 1813, when Russian Emperor Alexander I, through Peter Dobell, an Irish-American businessman, established the Russian consulate in Manila, the first ever Russian mission to promote relations between Russia and the Far East. Modern diplomatic relations between the Philippines and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were established on June 2, 1976, when the USSR was dissolved on December 26, 1991. The responsibilities and obligations arising from bilateral agreements were assumed by the Russian Federation, which the Philippines formally recognized on 28 December 1991. Since 1976, our relations have expanded, covering various sectors. I recall President Rodrigo Duterte's speech at the 2019 Valdai Forum in Sochi, citing how, for so many years, Russia remained at the margins of Philippine diplomacy. He said that, I quote, it was an oversight of strategic proportion, close quote, which was corrected under this administration when bilateral relations with Moscow broke new ground. From being at the margins of Philippine foreign policy, attention has shifted with the aim of establishing a robust, comprehensive, and mutually beneficial partnership with Russia founded on shared interests, sovereign equality, and pragmatism. Under the leadership of President Rodrigo Duterte, we have seen a dramatic reinvigoration in Philippines-Russian relations. In just 5 years, 30 agreements have been concluded between our two countries in the fields of defense, security, military technical cooperation, mutual legal assistance, extradition, nuclear energy, transport, higher education, intellectual property, agriculture, trade, tourism, nuclear medicine, and so many others. The renewed relations were translated into closer ties and in increasing bilateral exchanges at all levels. What have we achieved? In the last 4 decades, this is as old as I am in the Foreign Service, our two countries have strengthened cooperation across political, economic, and socio-cultural sectors, as well as in multilateral arena. Animated by President Duterte's independent foreign policy and President Putin's pivot to the East, recent years have been dramatic increases in visits of high-level and official delegations to each other's country. President Duterte undertook an official visit to Russia on 22 to 24 May 2017 upon the invitation of President Putin. This marked the first ever visit of the president to Russia. The visit was cut short, unfortunately, due to the emergency situation in Marawi City. But the Russian government arranged a meeting between him and President Putin in the Kremlin. The visit was both historic and productive, as it resulted in 11 MOAs, and $875 million worth of business deals signed. Contacts at the highest levels continued in November 2017, with President Duterte meeting President Putin in Da Nang, Vietnam, and with Prime Minister Medvedev in Manila. The official visits to the Philippines of Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in October 2017, and the Secretary of Russia's National Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, in February 2018, added to the roster of high-level visits. After President Putin's re-election in March 2018, President Duterte, through a congratulatory letter, invited President Putin to undertake a state visit to the Philippines. If conditions allow it, it will be the first visit of any Soviet or Russian head of state since diplomatic relations were established on June 2, 1976. Upon the invitation of President Putin, President Duterte visited the Russian Federation a second time on 1 to 6 October 2019. The President held bilateral meetings with President Putin and Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev to discuss the state of our bilateral relations and to identify ways to further intensify our cooperation in the areas of security and defense, trade and investment, agriculture, energy, science and technology, and sociocultural exchanges. In Sochi, the President addressed the Forum of the Valdai International Discussion Club and highlighted the importance of upholding the principles of respect for sovereignty, non-intervention, and peaceful resolution of disputes. More than $260 million in business deals were signed during this second visit. On 13 April 2021, President Rodrigo Duterte had a 30-minute tele-summit with President Putin. Among the topics discussed were vaccine cooperation, the 45th anniversary celebrations, and cooperation on the two leaders on national defense, on defense and national security. On 1 May 2021, true to their word, pursuant to the commitment of the two leaders to cooperate against the COVID-19 pandemic, the first batch of Sputnik V vaccines, 15,000 doses, arrived in Manila from Moscow. Thank you, Russia. And also a special thanks to the Philippine Embassy in Moscow, headed by Ambassador Soreta, for making that possible. I think the vaccines were immediately used and we are awaiting more batches from Russia. These exchanges have further boosted cooperation in both countries. I'm pleased to note that exchanges are not only happening at the highest levels, but consultations at the working and technical levels are also being held, ensuring that agreements do not remain in the realm of theory. They are followed through and they are implemented, and new areas for cooperation are identified. We have active formal mechanisms between our foreign ministries defense ministries, national security agencies, and trade ministries. These meetings have provided platforms for our government to explore ways to expand our partnerships, as well as exchange views on regional and international issues of common interest. Political cooperation between the Philippines and Russia is advancing fast. Just last month, as I mentioned to you, I had the pleasure and the honor to co-chair with Deputy Minister Morgulov, my co-chair, the 12th Philippines-Russia political consultations. The political consultation is a concrete mechanism to take stock of our bilateral relations. During the candid, friendly, and comprehensive political consultations, DM Morgulov and I committed to further enhance our partnership, which resulted in 30 agreed points of action from both sides. Inter-parliamentary exchanges between the Philippines and Russia have played an integral role in strengthening Philippines-Russia relations. Members of the Philippine Senate and House of Representatives held several exchanges of visits to participate in various international meetings and conferences. Defense cooperation received a big boost under the Agreement on Defense Cooperation between the Philippine Department of National Defense and Russia's Ministry of Defense, signed in 2017. This defense cooperation agreement provided for the establishment of a joint working group assigned to manage its implementation and identify specific areas of cooperation. Following its inauguration and the signing of its TOR in 2018, the Philippine-Russia JWG convened for the third time last 6 December 2019 in Manila. The fourth JWG meeting is tentatively scheduled in the first semester of 2021. We also have an agreement on military technical cooperation, which aims to provide a framework for enhancing and strengthening cooperation in the field of logistics and defense. In 2019, an implementing arrangement was also concluded between the Philippine Navy and the Russian Navy to facilitate naval cooperation through combined naval facilities, naval training and education, and humanitarian assistance and disaster response. We acknowledge only recently the call on the Port of Manila from 22-25 May 2021 of 3 Russian warships, namely the Varyag, a guided missile cruiser, the Marshal Shaposhnikov, a large anti-submarine ship, and a Boris Gotuma, a large sea tanker in Philippine waters as part of the 45th anniversary celebration. Unfortunately, due to the epidemiological situation, we have been unable to conduct joint exercises as we had planned. At the third National Security Agency's meeting of Russia and the Philippines expressed appreciation to the Russian government for the training offered to the Philippine National Police Force. The fourth National Security Agency's meeting will take place towards the latter part of this year. In terms of economic cooperation, the Philippines and Russia are working to enhance trade and investment promotion between the two countries. Economic cooperation between our countries is steadily growing. In 2010, total trade between the Philippines and Russia was only a measly $486 million. 10 years later, it doubled to $862 million. Russia was the Philippines' 19th largest trading partner out of 224 in 2020, 32nd export market out of 210, and 14th import supplier out of 204. Prior to the pandemic, Philippine exports to Russia grew by 18.81%. Under the framework of the Philippines-Russia Joint Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation, the Philippines and Russia were able to accredit business establishments, including the accreditation of 5 Philippine fishery establishments and 4 Russian poultry meat establishments. We hope that more Philippine establishments will be accredited to export to Russia, as there is an interest from top Russian companies to import Philippine fresh frozen seafood and marine products. The Philippines is keen to pursue agricultural cooperation with Russia. Last year, the Philippines made good progress in exporting its products to Russia, including 15 healthy, organic, and ethically harvested coconut products through Russia's retail supermarkets and online retail marketplaces. The Philippines now has more products in the mainstream Russian market, both under the Russian brand and under Philippine brands. I promise you, we will not regret taking these Philippine products. The Philippines looks forward to more collaborative activities with Russia under the framework of the JCPEC. The pandemic has not stopped us from enhancing our economic cooperation. I know that during the virtual JCPEC co-chairs meeting held in November last year, the Philippines and Russia had in-depth discussions on prospects for enhancing trade in agricultural and other products, partnership in the COVID-19 response, and cooperation in areas such as energy, nuclear science, technology, infrastructure, transport, and so many others. We've also finalized the terms of reference of the Philippines-Russia Working Group on Industry Development Cooperation. People-to-people exchanges are an important pillar of Philippines-Russia bilateral cooperation. The protocol on cultural cooperation between the Philippine National Commission for Culture and the Arts and the Russian Ministry of Culture in 2017-2019, signed in 2017, ushered the celebration of Days of Philippine Culture in Russia with Philippine cultural performances in Moscow and St. Petersburg, exhibition of Philippine weaves, and master classes on Philippine folk dances and music. Russia has also been conducting Days of Russian Culture here in the Philippines, which help increase awareness and appreciation of Russian culture and the arts in the Philippines. On cooperation in the area of education, the MOU between the Philippine Commission on Higher Education and Russia's Ministry of Education and Science in the sphere of higher education was signed on 13 November 2017 and entered into force on 2 February 2018. Russian institutions, particularly the Tomsk Polytechnic University, under the quota of Rosatom, provided graduate scholarships in nuclear engineering to Filipino students. Educational programs were also offered by the Tula State University and the Tula State Leo Tolstoy Pedagogical University of the Russian Federation. Russian Ministry of Science and Higher Education is offering scholarships to interested individuals in various Russian universities. We hope that we will be able to send Filipino students to these programs. Last week, we were informed that Russia is inviting 5 officials from the Philippines to participate in a short-term training course for diplomats at the Diplomatic Academy of its Ministry of Foreign Affairs 2022. The Philippines and Russia are also partners in the multilateral arena, supporting each other's candidatures and advocacies of mutual interest. In terms of how the Filipinos and Russians see each other, there has been a marked change in perspective, a shift from Cold War enemy to friend. During the Cold War years, 1945 to 1989, the Philippines and Russia belonged to different and hostile ideological camps, resulting in different perspectives on how Russians and Filipinos viewed each other. This has now changed. With the relative success of integration of over 10,000 Filipino workers in Russia, The Russians have a newfound admiration and respect for Filipino workers whom they discovered to be hardworking, trustworthy, and conscientious. Likewise, Filipinos are no longer held in thrall by how Hollywood and the Western media portray Russia and the Russians. They, the Russians, are like a newly found old friend in that both Filipino and Russian peoples, to a great extent, believe in the same God and have similar family-centric values. The future of Philippines-Russia relations. After 45 years, Philippine and Russian relations still have a long way to go, despite the many achievements I mentioned earlier. The challenges of today's world present opportunities for further cooperation. First, of course, is vaccine cooperation, as Lou mentioned earlier. As we continue to battle the COVID-19 pandemic, we look to Russia as a reliable partner on vaccine procurement and manufacturing. I'd also like to thank our Russian friends for supplying us 30,000 doses of Sputnik V vaccines, which arrived this month, as I said earlier. As the virus will be with us for many years to come, in one form or another, the Philippines is interested in cooperating with Russia in localizing vaccine manufacturing. Vaccine cooperation with Russia is not only limited to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Philippines and Russia could participate in joint cooperation projects for producing vaccines for other viral diseases in the future, especially when the Virology Science and Technology Institute of the Philippines is established. Second, defense cooperation. The Philippines and Russia could benefit from enhanced exchanges and cooperation between our respective defense ministries, intelligence officials, and military officers. The agreements on defense cooperation and military technical cooperation signed in 2017 have expanded Philippine-Russian cooperation in this field. However, there is still a vast potential for collaboration, including on crime prevention and disaster risk reduction and management. Due to the pandemic, face-to-face defense cooperation has declined, but we hope that when the situation improves, we could resume physical cooperation activities. Third, space cooperation is another area that the Philippines and Russia could collaborate on. The Philippines has just established its space agency, and we could learn a lot from Russia's advanced technological know-how on space exploration. We look forward to the conclusion of the Philippines-Russia Agreement on cooperation in the exploration and the use of outer space for peaceful purposes. The Philippine Space Agency is keen on developing joint activities with Roscosmos and Globcosmos in space science and technology applications under this agreement. We are interested in undertaking university exchange programs on space law and policy, human resources development for high-tech industry, and rocket science and engineering. I thought rocket science was just fiction. It is true. Fourth, energy cooperation between the Philippines and Russia could be further explored. As the Philippines works to enhance its energy security, Russian investments and technology can greatly contribute to diversifying our energy resources. Russian companies may wish to participate in the Philippine oil and gas exploration and development through the Philippine Conventional Energy Contracting Program, PCEP. The Philippines and Russia could also cooperate on the peaceful use of nuclear energy. I understand that our nuclear regulatory agencies, the Philippine Nuclear and Research Institute, PNRI, and Russia's Rostechnadzor just concluded a joint workshop on Philippine and Russia's nuclear regulatory frameworks 2 weeks ago. Lots of things happening. More than 10,000 Filipinos call Russia home now. Thank you, Russia, for your kind hospitality to them. Some have been in Russia for more than 40 years, starting out as students in Moscow during Soviet rule. Many have become Russian citizens, but most are female, work as nannies, and have irregular visa status. Will this situation stay the same or change in the future? I hope it will. The migration status of these thousands of Filipinos has a direct bearing on long-term bilateral relations. The mishandling of their situation and work status could become a potential irritant. I hope not, because we have excellent mechanisms. No less than the two presidents, Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo, and then current President Rodrigo Duterte, directly addressed their issues when they visited Moscow. As you know, the Philippines is one of a few countries in the world that consider assistance to nationals as co-equal pillars of our foreign policy. Two important developments lead one to guarded optimism. The start of negotiations for a bilateral labor agreement, now down to a single negotiating text, and a change in the Russian labor law, which allows individual Russians to seek Filipino workers provided they fulfill certain criteria, such as approval from the District or Regional Office of the Ministry of Labor and Social Services, and proof that no Russian citizens could be found to fulfill the job requirements. We look forward to positive developments with regard to the eventual successful conclusion of this bilateral labor agreement, which will solve the current challenges faced by both our countries in our bilateral labor relations. In conclusion, Philippine-Russian bilateral ties have grown significantly over the years, but there is enormous potential for further cooperation through the existing bilateral consultation mechanisms, namely those that I mentioned earlier. It's also important to sustain the exchange of visits and exchanges between Philippine and Russian officials at all levels to bolster economic cooperation. Finally, increased people-to-people exchanges is crucial to promote mutual trust and understanding between our two peoples. It will cement Philippine-Russian relations together with a strengthened political dialogue and an enhanced economic cooperation at the most. I look forward to more years of deepened cooperation with Russia and its peoples. Thank you very much, and may you have a very productive virtual conference. I congratulate the organizers of this conference, the Foreign Service Institute of the Philippines and the MGIMO of Russia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for that very comprehensive presentation and for the kind words. What Excellency has failed to mention actually is that she's my second mother. That's why the unconditional praise for my still unproven moderator skills. In any case, let me just recap what the Excellency has pointed out. Indeed, President Duterte's independent foreign policy has been a game changer in Philippines' relations towards Russia. It led to a long overdue re-evaluation of Russia's place in Philippine foreign policy from a distant friend, if you may, after the end of the Cold War to a key partner for security and development today. Second, over the past 3 to 4 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in bilateral engagement in many areas and at various levels, from the highest political leadership to the working level. More importantly, we entered into a rapid institution building phase, particularly the defense, security, and economic spheres. It is hoped that the bilateral mechanisms we've created will sustain the momentum and bring the relations to greater heights in the coming years. And finally, as with all relationships, but more so with Philippine-Russia ties, there will always be room for growth. Undersecretary Buensuceso identified several areas where more work should be done, primarily vaccine cooperation, intelligence sharing, and collaboration in fighting non-traditional security threats, space and energy cooperation, labor migration, and people-to-people exchanges. So now to give us the Russian perspective, we are joined today by His Excellency Igor Morgulov, Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation. His Excellency is in charge of Russia's relations with the Asia-Pacific countries and multilateral institutions, including ASEAN and APEC. He has a direct hand in shepherding PH-Russia bilateral cooperation. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, and a very good morning to all of you from Moscow. It's really a very sunny, beautiful morning here, which exactly match the event that we are celebrating today, the occasion of the 45th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Russia and the Philippines. And let me start with the notion, Lou, that I'm glad to see you again. And I understand that you were not only one of the brightest of officers under the able leadership of my friend Elizabeth, but you were also one of the brightest Filipino diplomats here in Moscow. I recall our years of our cooperation, and I'm glad to see you again. I'm also happy to see my friends and colleagues. Elizabeth, good afternoon to you. Mr. Pavlov, good afternoon to you as well. Good morning to Mr. Sareta. We indeed met last month for bilateral consultations between two foreign ministries. It was, as always, very productive and useful. And I'm glad that I have an opportunity to see my friends today again. And this is really a good occasion for us to meet and to look back to the past of our relations, to analyze the current state of where we are, and to look forward for the prospect of Russia-Philippines relations. Elizabeth mentioned that we belonged to different ideological camps during the Cold War era. But interestingly enough, despite this fact, we established our diplomatic relations in the midst of this Cold War era in 1976. I think this is a very remarkable notion that despite the differences that we had at that time, there was a will of political will on two sides to establish ties, to develop relations, to enhance cooperation. And let me tell you that over these years, the entirety of international relations have been reconfigured, and we see real changes, global changes, new challenges that emerged, and the I would say current global agenda is changing, and it is very encouraging to see that despite these changes, despite this giving this new environment that we see, our countries remain committed to enhancing the political dialogue and deepening our cooperation in all areas, and coordination on international, regional arenas, and just to promote the friendship between two nations. And I should say that Philippines, with its beneficial geographical position, has long been of special interest to Russia. And Elizabeth mentioned Russian explorers and navigators, and this interest goes back to early 19th century when Russian navigators, namely Vasily Golovnin, Otto von Kotzebue, Fyodor Litke, visited Manila, and during their long distance travels. And in 1920s, the Russian consulate in Manila, Consulate General, by the way, it was our country's first Consulate General in Southeast Asia, and it was already operating in early 19th century. So also one of the greatest Russian writers, Ivan Goncharov, he left very informative notes full of very acute observations about the visit of the frigate Pallada to the Philippines in 1854. He mentioned, among other things, the particular musical prowess of Filipinos and their aptitudes for arts in general. And he was also impressed by the abundance of local nature. He wrote, and I quote, "Everything is so bright, so mesmerizing, fantastically gorgeous," end of quote. So, and this is as it is today. It is absolutely true that we are really mesmerized by the beauty of your country. Of course, not only beauty of the Philippines capturing minds of Russian people, of course not. Russia closely followed the development of the national liberation movement in your country since that time, and we monitored very tumultuous relations between the Philippines and Spain and then the United States. And in this context, it became obvious that there was a need for in-depth systematic study of the Philippines' history, culture, economy, and domestic and foreign policy. And between the two world wars, these studies gradually developed into a separate branch of Oriental studies here in Russia, and later evolved into an independent scientific school. And currently, highly qualified specialists for this region work at the Russian Academy of Science, Moscow State University, St. Petersburg State University, of course, MGIMO, which is organizing today's event. And students in some Russian universities study Filipino as their primary foreign language, and experts of the ASEAN Centre in MGIMO also contributed, like I said, to the development of Filipinology in Russia. The defeat of the militarist Japan led to the Philippines gaining its true independence after the World War II and pursuing its own foreign policy. And the second half of the 60s saw the gradual step-by-step building of regular contacts between Russia and the Philippines. Two countries started exchanging delegations, including parliamentarian ones, as well as other delegations of public and cultural organizations. They developed trade and economic relations in the 60s and 70s last century. And a joint shipping company was founded at that time. The Russian press outlets, namely TASS, Izvestia, others, the offices were opened in Manila, friendship societies were established. And it all culminated in the official visit of Ferdinand Marcos, president of the Philippines, to Moscow, resulting in signing the joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations and trade agreement on June 2nd, 1976, that we celebrate today. It was a really historic milestone. That step laid a solid institutional foundation for today's relation and for rapidly developing practical cooperation between our countries. And by the beginning of the 1990s, we had gained enough interaction experience that let us successfully overcome the turbulence of that period of time. And of course, I mean the dissolution of the Soviet Union and fundamental shifts in the global politics that took place at that time. And it is worth mentioning, by the way, that in December 1991, Manila was one of the first to recognize the Russian Federation as a successor state of the USSR. Nowadays, the Philippines is an important partner of Russia in Southeast Asia. Our bilateral ties are built upon similar or identical approaches towards such issues as constructing a fairer and more democratic system of international relations, ensuring security in the Asia-Pacific region, fighting against terrorism, transnational crime, drug trafficking, and today fighting with global pandemic of COVID-19. We consider the Philippines as a key ASEAN member state. We believe that Manila has a special role to play in strengthening the association and defending the principles of ASEAN centrality that we wholeheartedly support. And we know that there are some, challenges to the ASEAN centrality these days. We discussed it with my colleague Elizabeth during the consultations that we had last month, and I reconfirmed Russia's very strong support for the continuity of ASEAN's central role in regional architecture, be it political, economical, or security matters. In our view, a fruitful summit level and high level dialogue that we have established is a remarkable achievement. In May 2017 and October 2019, Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Republic of the Philippines, made official visits to Russia, and I was honored to accompany him during these visits. The leaders of two countries met several times on the sidelines of APEC summits and other major international events. On April 13, 2021, they held a telephone conversation, exchanging opinions on a wide variety of topics and setting forth the objectives for the immediate future. And of course, they discussed the prospects of our cooperation in fighting COVID-19, the current pandemic. Russia and the Philippines maintain regular contacts through major state institutions, including security councils, legislative bodies, line ministries, and agencies. And Elizabeth made an absolutely brilliant, as always, she did, a report and presentation of the current state of our relations. I wouldn't repeat all she said, but I agree with all major points of her presentation. I also agree with my colleague Elizabeth that sustainable relations between two Ministry of Foreign Affairs are very important. And we appreciate the atmosphere of trust enabling us to openly discuss relevant matters of bilateral relations as well as critical international and regional issues. The friendly nature of our communication was clearly confirmed during the phone call between my minister, Sergei Lavrov, and Secretary Theodora Loksin on March 30th this year. And by the way, we're still now planning the visit of His Excellency Mr. Loksin to Moscow and looking forward to this very important event. And like I said, in the beginning, I'm very much satisfied with the outcomes of the consultations between myself and Elizabeth that we had last month. And we are willing to use this channel of our regular coordination of our position in future. In the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, the joint fight against the spread of the coronavirus has become one of the prominent areas of our cooperation. In March 2021, the Sputnik V vaccine was registered for urgent use in the Philippines. And like Elizabeth said, in May, the first batch of 30,000 doses was delivered to Manila, and larger batches of the Russian vaccine are expected to be delivered in the nearest future to hopefully protect the health of millions of our Filipino friends. Trade and economic cooperation. Elizabeth also mentioned this area, and I agree with many things that she said. And all in all, I believe this area looks quite promising. In 2020, the coronavirus pandemic caused bilateral trade turnover to shrink to under $1 billion US. This figure cannot be considered as an adequate match to the potential that we have in our economic cooperation. And we believe that our priority should be to steer our economic cooperation towards sustainable growth and make it more diverse, as evidenced by the online meeting of the co-chairs of the Joint Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation held last November, as well as sectoral roundtables. Our countries are willing to implement joint projects in such fields as aircraft building, shipbuilding, peaceful atom, energy sector, infrastructure, railway and road transportation, and some others. And during our consultations with Elizabeth last month, I already shared my thoughts on the change in the Filipino businessman perception of Russia that has happened in recent decades. I myself first visited your country in early 2000, and I remember that my first meetings in the foreign ministry were, just description of what Russia is, where it is, and what kind of opportunities Filipino business may have in Russia. Now, of course, it's absolutely different picture. We know each other much better. We see growing interest of Filipino business here in Russia and of Russian businessmen to do business and to operate in the Philippines. And I think that we are not talking about some basic knowledge of two sides businessmen, but we are talking about how to confidently navigate Russian business in the Philippines and Filipino business here in Russia, and to help business people of two countries to promote and increase their business contacts and business ties. And in this regard, in particular, we expect the business forum initiated by the Russian Ministry of Economic Development to have a positive impact to solve this issue. Let me also mention tourism, because before the pandemic, the Philippines was known in Russia as one of the best tourist destinations. Such geographical names as Boracay, Cebu, Bohol, Palawan have become well-known names among Russians. And once the epidemic situation returns to normal, we expect the tourist traffic not only to restore, but reach a new record high. And we are also looking forward to welcoming Filipino visitors here in Russia. Our countries have numerous points of mutual attractions in terms of culture. In the Philippines, there are monuments to two great Russian writers, Alexander Pushkin and Leo Tolstoy. Here in Russia, we know novels by Jose Rizal, your national hero, whose 160th birthday we celebrate this year. And his works were published in the Ussr, and his biography was also released as a part of the popular book series here in Russia, The Life of Remarkable People. So let us do more in this area, in cultural area. Let our people enjoy more of the cultural, heritage that our countries have. By the way, Philippine ballet has Russian roots, and I also know that Russian ballet is very popular in the Philippines. And I still have a very vivid memory of your folk dance when President Duterte was here. Ambassador Sareta organized a beautiful concert of the Filipino folk dance troupe, and it was absolutely remarkable. I still have my deepest impression of the beauty of Philippine dancing and songs and music, absolutely wonderful music. And I have memory of these Filipino dancers performed Russian traditional dance and singing Kalinka and Moscow Nights. It was absolutely fantastic. So let us do more cultural dialogue. Let us do more people-to-people contacts. It is very important area of our relations. So all in all, we are confident that these 45 years are only the starting point of long journey that we have. 45 years is not that big number. In terms of human life, it's a peak of life, and we hope that we can and we must and we can successfully move forward hand in hand, overcome challenges together, consolidate the achievements that we have already in place, and constantly advance towards the new quality of the Russian-Philippine cooperation. In conclusion, my dear friends, let me once again to congratulate all of us with this wonderful anniversary. And I am very confident of the future of the Russian-Philippine relations. I also want to congratulate the organizers of today's event with this wonderful idea to have this, to organize this conference. It is absolutely timely. It is very important. And I believe it will be, another big input in promotion of the relationship between two countries. So my best wishes to all of you, and thank you very much for your attention, dear friends.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for the valuable insights, and thank you for the kind words. I'm very humbled by what you've said. It's really a pleasure to see you again after how many years leaving Moscow. Let me just recap my key takeaways from His Excellency's presentation. Number one, Russia's interest in the Philippines has a very, very long history. It predates actually the official establishment of diplomatic relations, and it's really shown in the existence of Philippine studies programs in Moscow State University, St. Petersburg State University, and MGIMO. And this means that Russia has really a very deep understanding of Philippine culture, history, politics, probably more than we Filipinos in terms of our understanding and perception of Russia, which is something that we have to correct, of course. The second takeaway is that the 1976 communique, which led to the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Philippines and the Soviet Union, was really a milestone, considering that it was concluded at the height of the Cold War with all the political constraints it posed to both sides. And the fact that the relationship has survived during those tumultuous times and even after the end of the Cold War with Russia's transition speaks to the political will of both sides to sustain this relationship. And today, Russia considers the Philippines as a key partner bilaterally and as a partner in ASEAN, because we have a common desire to promote peace and security in the Asia-Pacific region. And we share the same view that IR should be democratized in a way, that double standards and these block approaches are already anachronistic in the current interdependent world. And then, of course, we're both invested in protecting ASEAN centrality, which Russia, as His Excellency has noted, supports. And of course, today, relations have grown over the past 3 to 4 years because of this shift, of course, from the Philippine side, the decision to elevate relations with Russia, which was matched by Russia's interest to further foster relations for cooperation with the Philippines. And His Excellency has identified various areas where cooperation need to be improved. He mentioned tourism, people-to-people exchanges. In the economic area, you have aircraft building, shipbuilding, railway, where Russia has obviously the edge, the technological edge the Philippines can benefit from. And His Excellency is of course correct, 45 years is not a long time and we have more to go. And given the strength of the relations now, we can be confident that the relations will further grow in the coming years. So with that, I now turn over the floor to Dr. Koldunova, to Ekaterina, who will moderate the second session. Dr. Koldunova, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Liu, and thanks for wonderful moderation, and to all the speakers who presented us a very broad picture of our achievements, but also avenues for further development. Now, let us move to the second topic, Russia-Philippines political and security cooperation, where we will have two distinguished speakers, His Excellency Murat Pavlov, the Ambassador of the Russian Federation to the Republic of the Philippines, and His Excellency Carlos Soret, Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to the Russian Federation. His Excellency Murat Pavlov is MGIMO graduate, and he was designated as Russia's ambassador to the Philippines in 2020, a difficult year when the world, Russia and the Philippines alike, were severely hit by the pandemic. And many opportunities for physical contacts were either cut or interrupted very strongly. And despite all this, he has already indicated his very deep commitment to the development of our relations. And this conference is just one of these indications. And we are very much happy to have such an energetic ambassador who will truly, I think, take care of our relations from the Russian side in the Philippines. So, Your Excellency, please, the screen is yours for your talk and presentation.
Thank you so much, dear friends, colleagues, and partners. It's very difficult to speak after outstanding leaders like Mr. Morgulov and Undersecretary Buensuceso, giving their solid performance and very detailed presentation of our achievements and maybe our mutual goals. It is also my great pleasure for me to speak on virtual platform of my alma mater. But first of all, I would like to thank the organizer of this event, ASEAN Centre MGIMO University, and the Foreign Service Institute of the Philippines, and to greet all the participants. I was invited to speak on the Russian-Philippines political and security cooperation. But I was limited in time, and so I would like to be rather short. But in any way, in my speech, I found a key word is security. And in this occasion, I'd like to quote my president, Vladimir Putin, who during the presentation of foreign ambassadors' letters of credence on May 18, said, I quote, "Russia is open to mutually beneficial partnership, and we are ready to work together with all states without exception on the basis of equality, respect for each other's interest, and non-interference in internal affairs. We have consistently advocated the establishment of equal and indivisible security." Security is the key word, I said. "Honest and fair economic cooperation, free from unfair competition and politically motivated sanctions and restrictions." I suppose that in this context, the Philippine side shares our position. That is why 45 years ago, both sides decided to establish diplomatic relations between our states. The economic mutual benefits of this political move were obvious for both sides, and it's relevant for us nowadays. This policy is being actively, I would like to emphasize, actively continued under President Duterte administration and President Vladimir Putin from the Russian side. Political dialogue between them is a mere confirmation of it, and it's fully contribute to the above-mentioned goals. To finish with the political cooperation, I'd like to note very fruitful bilateral consultation between our foreign ministers held last April. I was witnessed in this consultation, and I can share with you that for me it was a very impressive event. But the global security mentioned above depends on the sphere of application. During these 45 years of cooperation, the life itself has selected some crucial elements of the security. In my humble opinion, energy security is one of the most important and promising areas. Russia is one of main energy abundant and power generating countries in the world. The Russian companies are exploring new business opportunities in the Philippines. They are interested in supplying to the Philippines energy resources, crude oil and liquefied natural gas, as well as coal, naturally, on mutually beneficial and long-term basis. Only one figure. Last year, a share of fossil energy products in the Russian export to the Philippines reached 34%. Another very close geographically good example could be as following. Our oil and the gas companies have an experience of Russia-Vietnam cooperation in the field of oil and gas exploration and production. So that experience can be duplicated with local companies here in the Philippines. So the Russian energy company are also seeking cooperation with Philippine partners in the field of construction of power plants on traditional source of coal and natural gas. But the most promising area is the nuclear one. Our cooperation should be based on the intergovernmental agreement on cooperation in the field of use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, which is under review. And it could also pave the way for implementing the memorandum of intent between Rosatom Overseas and the Philippines Energy Department, signed on October 4, 2019 in Moscow, and constructing nuclear facilities in the Philippines. But the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes is not limited to generating electricity. And the state corporation Rosatom and the Department of Science and Technology with the Philippine Nuclear Research Institute have already been working on it. I can say that on May 28, they will hold the second session of joint working group meeting on non-energy application of nuclear technologies. But nuclear technologies are widely used in medicine to fight against cancer and in agriculture to extend the shelf life of fresh fruit and vegetables by sterilization so that the local product, the Filipino products, could be delivered to distant countries like Russia. On this particular issue, I would like also to emphasize the importance of food security. Bilateral agriculture cooperation is a promising area of interaction. The share of wheat grain, for instance, 2 years ago, reached 24% of Russian export to the country, something like 1 million tons. So we have some achievements in this field. And it was also mentioned that the Philippine fishery establishment have been authorized to export their products to Russia, as well as some our companies have been accredited to supply poultry. We still have a potential to expand it by opening Philippine market for beef and pork, fishery products, grain and wheat, flour. I think important those Russian products can gradually contribute to food security of the Philippines. But in this regard, fast-tracking bureaucratic procedures in the field of trade and agriculture may significantly increase our bilateral trade. One more vital area of collaboration in the strict sense of this word, vital, is ensuring health security. The pandemic of COVID-19 has already proved its importance. We need to vaccinate people to get herd immunity by joint efforts. No one is safe until everyone is safe. Upon the registration of Sputnik V last August in Russia, we were the first country that immediately offered its vaccine to the Philippines. Finally, on March 19, the Russian vaccine was granted emergency use authorization. With reference to the understanding reached during the phone call of Vladimir Putin and Rodrigo Duterte on April 13, we are working to boost combating COVID-19. It was said that pilot delivery of vaccine amounting 30,000 doses was implemented this May. The volume of doses will be gradually increased every month to have reached 20 million doses by the end of this year. But we would like not to be only a simple supplier, but to promote our technology collaboration. We are open for any kind of cooperation with reliable local partners that have solid technological capabilities. In conclusions, I wish everyone good health, prosperity, and as far as my speech was about the global security, I wish everyone stays safe and secure. Thank you for your attention. Salamat po, and congratulations on this very important event, 45th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Marat Ignatievich. It's an illusion that someone can be secure in this highly interconnected world indeed. And it's an illusion that someone can stay secure at the expense of others. So this simple fact is obvious, but it doesn't often transform to the practice of the real life interaction. And thank you, Your Excellency, for reminding us about it and for illustrating Russia-Philippines practical cooperation, which can ensure security in its broad sense for all the parties involved. At this point, let me now turn the screen to His Excellency Carlos Serreta, Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to the Russian Federation. We met with His Excellency Carlos Serreta before he was placed as the ambassador to Moscow, and since then, His Excellency became an indispensable part and parcel and driver of many cooperation projects involving ASEAN Centre and going at the high levels. So we are very much privileged that we can have him as a speaker today. Your Excellency, please, the screen is yours for your talk.
Thank you very much, Ekaterina. I'm going to have to agree with Ambassador Marat. It's rather difficult to follow Deputy Minister Morgulov and Undersecretary Buensuceso and discussing this topic. When I first hosted a national day here in Russia as ambassador 6 years ago, I joked that the Philippines and the United States used to have the same national day, the 4th of July. But this has changed, and now the Philippines and Russia share the same national day, the 12th of June. 6 years ago, this seemed more than a pleasant coincidence, nothing more. Today, some might say that it's a bit of a metaphor for the dramatic changes in our relationship. But I'm going to have to caution this, it's not a complete metaphor, for while we have not abandoned one for the others, things have indeed changed. 5 years ago, the present administration took a conscious decision to make this change. In 2016, President Duterte decided that to pursue an independent foreign policy, the Philippines must diversify its bilateral partnerships, rebalance and deepen ties with non-traditional partners. This historic shift put a spotlight on the Russian Federation in terms of our relationship. As quoted by Undersecretary Buensuceso, in his remarks in Sochi in 2019, President Duterte said that over 2 decades after the end of the Cold War, Philippine foreign policy had hardly evolved, keeping Russia on the margins of our diplomacy. For him, I remember him saying that this was an oversight of strategic proportions, symptomatic of blind attachment, and a massive failure to grasp change and to seize new opportunities. Thus, the thrust of Philippine foreign policy in terms of Russia since 2016 has been pragmatic engagement in all areas to build a robust, comprehensive, and mutually beneficial partnership on shared interests, sovereign equality, and of course, pragmatism, like I mentioned. We have had economic cooperation in the past since we established relations 45 years ago. In fact, at some point, we had a very active cultural and educational partnership. More recently, people-to-people exchanges has been on the rise, with more Filipinos working in Russia and more Russian tourists visiting the Philippines. And this was even before 2016. It was political and security cooperation that would pose the biggest challenge to this policy. Exchanges prior to 2016 had been virtually non-existent. There was a stark absence of political or legal agreements that would serve as the basis for cooperation in defense and security and military cooperation. The stark absence of a policy on this, or the vacuum, is a particular area where it was because Philippine foreign policy at that time had been joined at the hip with the policy of our major ally to isolate Russia, even beyond the Cold War, even beyond the end of the Cold War. But it is also in this area, in political defense and security, that we would find the most dramatic transformations and reap the biggest benefits. Marked by 2 presidential visits 2 years apart and a new and comprehensive legal framework for cooperation. In the past 5 years, Philippine foreign secretaries visited Russia 4 times. Defense Secretary Lorenzana was in Russia 5 times, while National Security Advisor Esperon visited 4 times. Prior to these visits, no defense secretary or national security advisor had ever visited Russia in an official capacity. Each of these visits had full and fruitful agendas. And during this time, for the very first time, we received military aid from Russia, for which we were very much grateful. Visits and agreements have also been realized between our civilian security agencies, from our Coast Guard to our local government and police, to drug enforcement agencies, to justice ministries, and our communications and cybersecurity agencies. In another historic first, Russia actually trained members of the Presidential Security Group here in Moscow. In ancient times, this was a very powerful symbol of trust, when one sovereign would offer to another to train those who guard him, and the other sovereign would in turn send his best knights to be trained. Today, we now have defense and military attachés in both our embassies. If I may bring up my father was in the Defense Attaché Corps many decades ago. And he told me that in the 70s, there was a time when this was contemplated, that there would be defense and military attachés exchanges. But the problem was on the Philippine side. There were no volunteers. He said that at that time, such an assignment would have been a career ender for any military personnel. Key to this policy decision of the president is a decision for the Philippines not to always necessarily take sides. The reality is Russia and the United States have serious political and security differences. Structures even exist that institutionalize these differences. But for us, for the Philippines, their conflicts are their own, and we should be friends with both. Their differences should remain between them. Another key to the president's policy is how we view Russia in the context of our own region security. It is in our region where rivalries between these two superpowers can be said to be at its lowest compared to other regions in the world, like Europe or the Middle East. While we do see Russia wanting to aggressively pursue an economic agenda in our region, particularly in the context of its Look East policy, we do not see Russia as expending time and resources to challenge the United States militarily or in terms of defense. And we believe this is how it should be if our region is to remain stable and become the true economic powerhouse that it is projected to be. Russia's policy of respect for and non-interference in internal affairs is also quite appealing and is consistent with ASEAN's core value. Russia's views on regional security, one that hopes for a region that is stable and secure, that makes military alliances not only obsolete, but also inimical, are also worth noting. On the regional and multilateral arena, we believe that Russia, with its global stature and wide experience in conflict prevention and management, can significantly contribute to the maintenance and stability in our region. And of course, the greater Asia Pacific. There are, of course, a lot of discussions on groupings that are emerging and with many, many colorful names. We are today addressing this very serious gap in our relationship, this dimension of security, political security and defense. And it has created a deeper relations between our countries. And this is proving to be a correct and strategic decision, particularly during this time of pandemic. If we had not taken this road to deepen our relations with Russia, some say that we might now be at the tail end of a very long line for Russia's precious COVID-19 vaccine. I'm sure there might be some disagreement on this. But there is still much to be done to sustain this momentum. In the Philippines, there's a serious vacuum in Russian academic studies. Scholarship should always be a pillar of policy. And in the Philippines, this pillar, as far as Russian studies is concerned, is weak. Thankfully, efforts are being made to correct this. And I'm noticing more and younger scholars opting to focus on Russian studies. And I understand that one major university in Manila in the Philippines has established a Russian Studies Center. Policy is also strongest when there is more national consensus behind it. Fortunately, we have started in earnest to battle stereotypes that Filipinos have about Russia. Again, academic scholarship is crucial to this, not only in policy studies, but also in other academic areas like literature and the performing arts. People-to-people exchanges are crucial to clearing the air and battling these stereotypes. It's in this context that both countries have recognized the important role that Filipino workers can play in Russia. particularly the role of skilled workers in developing the Russian Far East, and the role of household service workers in unleashing the full economic potential of working parents in Russia. Discussions are at an advanced stage for a regime that will allow legal deployment as well as protection for Filipino workers in Russia. The modality is through legislation or a labor agreement or a combination of both. To sustain this momentum, we are also hopeful that President Putin will be able to accept the invitation of the President to undertake a visit to the Philippines. If it is accepted, it will, as has been said, it will be the very first visit of any Soviet or Russian head of state to the Philippines. To maintain this momentum, we also need to address the few remaining issues on military procurement and work. And we all know that work towards this end continues. We have learned much. We've never done a procurement before with Russia, and in the past years, we have learned much on how to proceed and hurdle some of the problems. And now we have a clear idea of the way forward. For me, what is clear is that military procurement from Russia carries no political baggage and no political conditionalities. I've always thought, and Lou will probably roll her eyes because I've said this many times, I've always thought that our brave men and women in uniform, when they carry their weapons into battle to fight extremists or secessionists, when they do go into battle, they should be carrying weapons that don't have strings attached to them that run all the way up Pennsylvania Avenue. Russia does not impose these kinds of political conditionalities. They trust us that whenever we procure material, that we will use this in a manner consistent with international law. I mean, we won't use it to commit aggression or violate territorial integrity and like that. With a view to a more strategic relationship and with an projected increase in ship visits, and to prevent legal and constitutional ambiguities, perhaps it is also time to look at a discussion on some appropriate version of a status of forces agreement, limited in scope only to the activities contemplated. Absent that, there is a potential for misunderstanding on how to handle certain which I don't hope will happen, but handle certain incidents or mishaps. You know, there was a time that when it was inconceivable that our naval ships would one day be visiting each other's ports. This was my very thought in 2018 when I watched a Philippine warship, the BRP Tarlac, slowly and gingerly dock between a Russian submarine and a Russian destroyer in Vladivostok. Vladivostok and previous decades was a very restricted naval base. As I watched the ship dock, I thought to myself that in any other time in history, if ever these ships would have encountered each other in the high seas or anywhere, it would be with guns on high alert and not with sailors waving and with warm smiles. Indeed, times can change. They can change for the better for us and our region and our world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your very frank opinion and your ideas on our cooperation, and for reminding us that no change is possible without political will and without mutual trust. You also mentioned that there are conceptual points of convergence between Russia and ASEAN, between Russia and the Philippines in the political and security sphere, and I hope that this situation will continue. There are so many things which can be done together, enabling Russia and the Philippines, and at the same time not harming any third party. So I truly hope that this political will be among us, among our countries, leadership, and peoples of Russia and the Philippines. So thank you very much again, and let me now turn the screen to Ms. Lu again with the next topic on Russia-Philippines trade and economic cooperation. So Ms. Lu, please, then your turn is next. You are muted.
Okay, thank you, Ekaterina. So we move on to the next session on economic cooperation. This is one area where the impact on our people's lives is the most direct and immediate. And I think both sides recognize that our economic ties, while increasing over the years, have yet to be fully optimized. We have established the Joint Commission on Trade and Economic Relations to maximize opportunities for growth, not just in trade and investments, but also in infrastructure, agriculture, and energy cooperation, among others. And now to give us an update on the progress of our cooperation in this area, we have our first speaker, Assistant Secretary Alan B. Gepti of the Department of Trade and Industry of the Philippines. His main portfolio is international trade, policy, and trade negotiations at the bilateral, regional, and multilateral level. Assistant Secretary Gepti was the Philippines' lead trade negotiator in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, considered as the largest free trade deal in the world. He also serves as the country's senior economic official at the ASEAN. Assistant Secretary Gepti, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Ms. Lu, for that introduction. Good morning and good afternoon, colleagues. As I talk on the economic relations of Philippines and Russia today, I will give you a brief situationer of the two countries' trade and investment relations. However, allow me to focus more on opportunities and why the economic partnership is not only valuable, but strategic. For us to understand the full potential of Philippine-Russia economic relation, it may be well to have a short glimpse of its history and context. The opening of international trade from Manila, Acapulco to various development in the areas of economy, regional peace and security, and even geopolitical confrontations have always placed the Philippines at the core of the said developments. Unknown to many of us, early Russian interests on the Philippines can be traced back to the early years when the Philippines was discovered by Ferdinand Magellan. In fact, in 1523, an account of Magellan's travel, De Mollusis Insulis, was published in Latin and translated in Russian. The translation was credited to Dmitry Gerasimov, the ambassador of Grand Prince Basil III Ivanovich of Muscovy, from 1479 to 1533 to the Papal See in Rome. Since then, keen interest on the Philippines developed with a view to establish regular trade between Russia and the Philippines. And it is said that this eventually led to the establishment of a consulate general in Manila, the first Russian diplomatic mission in Southeast Asia. This is an indication that the Philippines at the outset was within the radar screen of Russia and that Philippines is significant in global trade. Fast forward, after the country's struggle for independence from the Spanish rule, Japanese occupation, and American rule, the Philippine economy interfaced mainly with a few trading partners, where it developed through the years some degree of attachment. Thus, other than Southeast Asian countries, the United States, Japan, European Union, and in recent years, China, figure prominently in the Philippine economy as important trading partners, major source of foreign direct investments, and significant contributors of overseas development assistance. Notably, however, the changing global economic landscape, not to mention the role of technology, prompted countries to expand their trade and investment relations, looking not only for new trading partners, but a deeper and broader economic integration. With this development, it has placed Asia as the major economic chatter in the era of globalization. From research and development, product development, manufacturing, and even market, economic activities have gravitated towards the region. Interestingly, the Philippines, which is strategically located in Asia, is even considered as the gateway of Asia. That considering, coupled with its young and dynamic workforce, the Philippines has undertaken reforms and policies intended to make the country as an innovation hub, an investment hub, manufacturing hub, and the center for research and development and education in the region. Now, let us look on the trade and investment situation of the Philippines with Russia. In 2020, Russia was the Philippines' 19th trading partner out of 226, 32nd export market out of 220, and 14th import supplier out of 194. Total trade between the two countries amounted to $862.8 million with a balance of $695.7 million in favor of the Russian Federation. An examination of the aforesaid ranking reflects the traction of the Russian economy in the country's state of economic affairs. The concentration of imports from Russia on petroleum, iron, and non-alloy steel contributes to the industrialization efforts of the Philippines. On the other hand, the Philippines' export strength in semiconductor and electronics suggests complementarity in the advancement of technology and manufacturing. Given the limited trade, the current standing, however, speaks of opportunities. In the past 5 years, trade between the two countries has substantially grown, albeit in favor of the Russian side. Over the same period, it is worth noting that Philippine exports generally sustained its increased level and that the country's agricultural products are gaining foothold in the Russian market. Among these products are desiccated coconuts, banana chips, tobacco, avocados, citrus, and pineapples. With the accreditation of some Philippine companies to export poultry and fishery products, Russia is now another ideal market for our producers and manufacturers of said products. Recently, the Philippines has made good progress in having available some Philippine products into Russia. Several business cooperation agreements have been forged between these Philippine and Russian companies through the facilitation of PTIC Moscow. As a result of said cooperation agreements, the Philippines has now more products in the mainstream Russian market, both under the Russian brand and under Philippine brands. What is critical in this trend and development is the regular high-level meetings among senior economic officials, including a meeting between no less than President Vladimir Putin and President Rodrigo Duterte in 2019. This meeting served not only as a policy compass, but as an institutional foundation that can help catapult increased trade and investments between the two countries. The establishment of the Philippine-Russia Joint Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation was also another important element. Since 2017, the JCTEC has served as an incubator for economic cooperation projects and agreements to be discussed and pursued in various areas such as trade, investment, agriculture, energy, ICT, science and technology, education, transport, and infrastructure. Through the JCTEC, the facilitation of accreditation procedure for Philippine products of interest and finalization of the terms of reference of the Philippine-Russia Working Group on Industry Development Cooperation, which was established in accordance with the MOU on Cooperation and Industry Development between the DTI and the Russian Ministry of Industry and Trade, have been undertaken and accomplished. Last year, notwithstanding current challenges, we have successfully convened a JCTEC co-chairs meeting on November 26 through digital video conference. This engagement is necessary to sustain the momentum of our bilateral relations. With this platform and level of engagement, and taking into account the opportunities brought about by the pandemic and the emerging needs in the global market, we are looking forward to more collaboration in pharmaceuticals, including vaccines, agriculture, shipbuilding, including ferries and ro-ro vessels, hydrofoil crafts and hovercraft, aerospace, energy, especially LNG, nuclear science and technology, ICT, automotive industry, and even infrastructure projects such as railroads, bridges, and ports. In fact, on June 1 this year, we will hold an online Philippine-Russia Business Forum under the theme Building Networks, Strengthening Partnership. The forum will focus on IT services and digital technologies, industry and agriculture. And for sure, this will be followed by more engagement and concrete results. To further amplify these opportunities, the participation of the Philippines in the recently concluded Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement would be another pathway for opportunities for Russian investors. The RCEP agreement is viewed as a renewed bow to the rules-based system of conducting trade and investment. It guarantees stability and predictability and prepares the region to embrace the emerging opportunities brought about by the shift in economic activities. More than enhanced market access, rules are very important because they ensure fair and equitable treatment among the stakeholders. In the RCEP region, the Philippines stand to be an ideal place for investment, innovation, manufacturing, and center for education and training. In these 4 areas, the Philippines has a comparative advantage compared with other countries in the region. The advantages are embedded not only in the legal and institutional regime of the Philippines, but in the skills of the people. The RCEP region being the biggest market in the world, Russian companies can invest in the Philippines, especially in electronics and high technology products, agriculture, pharmaceutical, and shipbuilding, and eventually access the RCEP market. For this, the Philippines remain open to engage with Russia to present these opportunities, including the salient features of the agreement, in a more detailed manner. Complemented with the newly enacted Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act that provides, among others, lower corporate income tax and additional incentives to qualified companies, and the ongoing legislative reforms in the country's Public Service Act, Foreign Investment Act, and Retail Trade Liberalization Act, the investment environment in the country is set to entrench a more conducive climate for Russian investors. It can be said that with the evolving and increasing linkages of the 2 countries, from tourism, trade, and investment, the Philippines could be an important link, not to say linchpin, in Russia's direction to establish a strategic economic foothold in Southeast Asia. In fact, a stronger economic partnership between the Eurasian Economic Union and ASEAN can also be worked out with Russia's more active presence in the Philippines. Lastly, as we face the challenges of the current pandemic and as we work for recovery and resilience, the momentum we have achieved in the past couple of years must be sustained. The private sector plays a key role on this agenda. They have to move forward the cooperation projects and business opportunities we have identified. And on the part of the government, we have to keep the direction of the sail towards a stable and business-friendly economic partnership. Mabuhay and spasiba.
Thank you very much, Asik Gepti, for a very insightful presentation. I have a few takeaways from what you have said. First is that the Philippines considers Russia as a valuable and strategic economic partner. Although economic relations between the Philippines and Russia have yet to reach its full potential, there are opportunities for growth, given that the Philippines is in a demographic sweet spot, and we are implementing economic reforms through the CREATE law, which provides great incentives for investors and business entities coming into the Philippines. And we are also building ourselves as an innovation hub and as a research and education center. But most importantly, what the idea that a strong partnership between the Philippines and Russia in the economic sphere could be beneficial to Russia, as it would be able to enter into the larger RCEP market, which is touted as the largest free trade area in the world. And of course, you've mentioned about the possibility of closer links between ASEAN and the larger Eurasian Economic Union. These are indeed opportunities for growth for the Philippines. And let me just mention also the areas of interest for the Philippines in terms of fostering more exchanges. We've mentioned, ASEC Gepti mentioned agriculture, pharmaceutical, given the current pandemic, shipbuilding, energy cooperation through LNG, nuclear science, infrastructure projects, where, as I said, Russia has the comparative advantage. I think with these key points, we can be confident that our economic relations would be in a better standing in the coming years if we just work on these areas where we see opportunities for growth. So now let me introduce to you our second speaker, Dr. Natalia Staplan. She is the Director of the Department for Multilateral Economic Cooperation and Special Projects of the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation. Before joining the MED, Dr. Staplan was in the academy as Associate Professor at the MGIMO University, lecturer at the Russian Presidential Academy of the National Academy and Public Administration, or RANEPA, and Director of the Russian Research Center of Asia-Pacific Cooperation of the RANEPA. She is a recipient of a certificate of recognition from the President of the Russian Federation. Dr. Staplan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Camoying. Nice to see all the participants, distinguished Undersecretary Buensuceso, Deputy Minister Morgulov, distinguished Ambassador Sareto, and Ambassador Pavlov. It's my honor to address short remarks on Russia-Philippine economic relations today. And my special greetings to Mr. Gepti, with whom we work very closely, as already was said. Let me start from expressing gratitude to ASEAN Centre MGIMO for the opportunity to participate in this conference, commemorating the important milestone, the 45th anniversary of establishing diplomatic ties between Russia and Philippines. And we pay special attention to our bilateral economic cooperation, and our mutual commitment to deepen ties is continuously reaffirmed during high-level intergovernmental contacts, as far as the working level consultations, which we, even in the COVID era, try to keep on through digital means. So if I will be allowed, I would like to share with you some slides. Yes, I hope. Is that okay? Could you see the slides? Great, great. Just a second. So after the significant decline in Russian-Philippine related trade in goods within the years of 2015 and 2016, we have been witnessing its stable recovery and growth starting from 2017. In the years of 2018 and 2019, bilateral trade exceeded $1 billion. In 2020, Russia-Philippines trade relations were affected by the COVID pandemic, and bilateral trade decreased by 17% and amounted slightly to $930 million. We hope for an early return to the positive dynamics in bilateral trade with the help of the ongoing vaccination against the coronavirus, including the Sputnik V vaccine. In May 2021, Russia started delivering the vaccine to the Philippines. On this slide, you may see the structure of Russian exports to the Philippines in 2020. A considerable part of Russian supplies to the Philippines is attributed to ferrous metals. Another major group is mineral products. And it is worth noticing that last year, Russia doubled its exports of agriculture products, namely wheat. Still, we see great potential in increasing our agricultural exports to the Philippines, especially our meat products and poultry, as well as milk products, and respective agricultural watchdogs from Russia and the Philippines are intensively working on the access of Russian meat producers to the Philippine market. We should move towards reducing the existing barriers affecting bilateral trade in food and agricultural products, as well as other products. The structure of imports from the Philippines to Russia is dominated by machinery, equipment, and vehicles. According to Russian statistics, this group of products accounts for strongly 85% of all Philippine supplies to Russia. And the major importing items are different types of electric tools, integrated circuits, and accumulators. The second largest group is agricultural products. We can see more and more delicious Philippine products such as mango fruits on the shelves of Russian grocery stores. And that's also my personal pleasure to be part of this intensifying expenditure of such agricultural exports to from Philippines. As Mr. Gepti already mentioned, the major mechanism which we are representing here is the Russia-Philippine Cooperation in Trade and Economic Joint Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation. It was created in 2015, and since then we have conducted 2 successful sessions. The Joint Commission is headed by Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade of the Russian Federation, Alexei Gruzdev, who sent his best wishes and congratulations on the occasion of the anniversary today, and Undersecretary for Trade and Industry of the Republic of Philippines, Mr. Seferino Rodolfo. The chairs of the Joint Commission communicate regularly on the important issues of bilateral agenda, and the latest co-chair meeting was held, the full-scale session on the, was held in 2019, and the latest co-chairs meeting was conducted last November via video conference. We hope we will be able to hold the full-scale session of the Commission as soon as all quarantine restrictions are lifted. Russia-Philippines Working Group on Industry Development Cooperation began functioning within the Joint Commission. And the first meeting of this working group took place just in March 2021. We believe it will become a useful platform for discussing joint projects in industry. As Mr. Gepti already mentioned, a special role we pay to multilateral cooperation. Russia and Philippines are representatives of integration blocs. As was already mentioned, Russia is one of members of Eurasian Economic Commission, and Philippines as a part of ASEAN, and from last year of a bigger integration bloc, RCEP, with occasion of what I congratulate Philippines for successful conclusion of those negotiations. And we clearly understand that this multilateral cooperation should play a special role in our relations. Here on the slide, you can see several examples of Russian ASEAN projects where Philippines participate very actively. We also communicate very successfully on the platform of APEC meetings and APEC fora. And I think that many issues of trade, economic development, mutual access, market access can be solved through multilateral cooperation with involvement of bigger number of states. And I absolutely support the idea that we, Russia, should use, how it was said, comparative advantage of Philippines as the member of RCEP as the entrance to a bigger integration bloc. So we will think thoroughly through this idea and try to work out some solutions how to use this opportunity. I absolutely agree that it is very beneficial for Russia. Here on the slide, you can see the perspective areas. Mr. Gepti also approached some areas, and I would say that our ideas coincide where we should work harder to enlarge our cooperation. Here you can see industry, ICT, digital technologies, agribusiness, energy, transport, banking and finance, and tourism. All those areas were already mentioned by previous speakers. And I would add that we do our home task. We do all the best what we can to attract the companies to be more active, to invest in Philippine economy and the Philippine companies to come to Russian market, which is also very prospective and I would say beneficial for Philippines. I would like to give just several examples of successful cooperation which is already going on. That's the Russian gas and Kamaz, who have been continuously supplying vehicles to the Philippine markets. In the ICT area, Russian company InfoWatch is cooperating with the Philippine Department of Information Communications Technology in terms of developing the Philippine National Research Engine. And one more example is the Russian company PIC, which is the largest Russian home builder and construction technology company. And it will implement its first projects outside Russia, and that will be in Philippines. PIC will build the 30-story building of One Sierra, I guess not far from Manila. And I hope that next time we will be ready to show the pictures of the result of Russian-Philippine productive cooperation. As already Mr. Gapti mentioned, in order to discuss more opportunities for deepening our ties in trade and economic area, we are now organizing and intensively preparing Russia-Philippines online business forum, together with our dear colleagues from the Department of Trade and Industry and the Board of Investment of the Philippines. The event will take place on the 1st of June 2021, and the discussion will focus on the cooperation in all those mentioned areas, especially in IT and digital technologies, industry and agriculture, as our priorities in the bilateral agenda. And I would say that we cannot lose the opportunity to communicate, to contact our businesses together. This B2B matching can be done even in these difficult COVID times through digital means. And I hope that this business forum will bring fruitful results for both countries, Russia and Philippines. Thank you very much for your attention. Maraming salamat po, and be safe. Thank you.
Dr. Staplan, for that very informative presentation. I note that the slides have shown, it shows that our trade figures pre-COVID have been increasing, both import and export from Russia, Philippines, and vice versa. But the trade imbalance is also still very, very wide, and it's still very, very much in favor of Russia. And I think one of the key ways to solve this, to correct this, you've mentioned, is really to to remove the trade barriers, especially in agriculture. We must accredit our agricultural companies who are interested in each other's market and to sell our products in each other's markets. So I think that's one thing. And you also pointed out the important role of the JC Tech as a mechanism to really drive our relations in the economic arena. And of course, you have already instituted this working group on industry development cooperation, which is an important pillar of cooperation in the economic sector. And as you have said also, we have to maximize multilateral cooperation in order to foster our economic ties. And you've mentioned APEC, ASEAN, and of course, as Gepti mentioned, the possible linkage between ASEAN and the larger Eurasian Economic Union. I think this is something that we should really study and work on and see where we can work on opportunities. So with this, I'd like to turn over the floor to Dr. Koldunova, so we can proceed to the next session on interparliamentary cooperation. Dr. Koldunova, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Lu. And we are now moving to another area of our cooperation, which is inter-parliamentary cooperation between Russia and the Philippines. And in this topic, we have two distinguished speakers. One is Her Excellency Lyudmila Talabayeva, head of the friendship group between the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation and the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines, and His Excellency Alan Peter Karetana, District Representative, House of the Representatives, Quezon City. Ms. Lyudmila Talabayeva is directly involved in organizing the inter-parliamentary cooperation between Russia and the Philippines. The friendship group between the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation and the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines is one of the biggest friendship groups of this kind. However, unfortunately, Ms. Talabayeva was not able to join us today in person, but contributed a video presentation. So let us now turn on this video presentation and let us listen to the speaker and her address.
Уважаемые коллеги, представители Центра ASEAN при МГИМО МИД России, наши филиппинские друзья, дамы и господа, для меня большая честь выступать на конференции, посвященной 45-летию установления дипломатических отношений между Российской Федерацией и Республикой Филиппины. В Совете Федерации, Верхней Палате Российского парламента, которая еще называется Палата регионов, я возглавляю группу по сотрудничеству Совета Федерации Федерального собрания Российской Федерации с Сенатом Конгресса Республики Филиппины. В Совете Федерации я представляю законодательную власть моего родного Приморского края, который является одним из самых больших регионов России, расположенным в самой крайней части юго-востока России. Его столица – город Владивосток, который от Республики Филиппины отделяет всего около 4000 километров. Приморский край вносит большой вклад в экономику России. Это заготовка древесины, ее переработка, транспортные перевозки, пищевая и горнодобывающая промышленность. Наиболее важная отрасль в нашем крае – это рыбацкая промышленность, которая занимает лидирующее место в продовольственной структуре края и оказывает большое влияние не только на благосостояние региона и Дальнего Востока, но и на экономику России в целом. На долю региона приходится треть от общероссийских уловов рыбы, добычи морепродуктов и выпуска пищевой рыбной продукции. Доля рыбной отрасли в объеме промышленного производства края составляет 29%. Рыбное хозяйство является ведущей отраслью и одним из основных источников занятости населения в Приморском крае. Благодаря своему опыту работы я вхожу в Комитет Совета Федерации по аграрно-продовольственной политике и природопользованию, деятельность которого направлена на совершенствование законодательства, регулирующего отношения в аграрной сфере и природопользования. Несмотря на тематическую направленность вопроса ведения комитета, я представляю интересы Приморского края по всем направлениям. В этом году Россия и Филиппины отмечают 45-летие установления дипломатических отношений. Это важный исторический рубеж. За прошедший период мы смогли достичь значительного взаимопонимания по ряду вопросов международного и регионального значения, расширив двухстороннюю повестку российско-филиппинских отношений. Мы также активно взаимодействуем в разных международных политических и экономических организациях, таких как Организация Объединенных Наций, Азиатско-Тихоокеанский экономический саммит, Восточно-Азиатский саммит и, конечно, в Ассоциации государств Юго-Восточной Азии. Азиатско-Тихоокеанский вектор международного сотрудничества для России имеет приоритетное значение, поскольку 3/4 российской территории расположены в Азии, и перспективы социально-экономического развития Российской Федерации руководство страны во многом связывает именно с этим регионом. В этом контексте считаю, что межпарламентское взаимодействие является важной основой сотрудничества между государствами. Так, например, в 1999 году Россия стала одной из стран-учредительниц Азиатской парламентской ассамблеи АПА, которая изначально носила название Азиатская ассоциация парламентов за мир. Членами Азиатской парламентской ассамблеи являются парламенты 42 государств, среди которых, конечно, Россия и Филиппины. В центре внимания Ассамблеи – координация усилий национальных парламентов в решении актуальных проблем современности, в том числе за счет повышения их роли в обеспечении мира в азиатском регионе. Последнее 12-е пленарное заседание АПА состоялось в Анталии, Турции, в декабре 2019 года. С 2010 года Россия участвует в парламентском партнерстве в рамках форума «Азия-Европа» АСЕП. В состав партнерства АСЕП входят все государства, члены Европейского Союза, ведущие государства, члены АСЕАН, другие сильнейшие экономики мира, не члены региональных объединений. Всего 53 государства-партнера. Партнерство представляет собой уникальную форму многостороннего демократичного диалога, цель которого – расширить влияние парламентов в осуществлении более эффективного парламентского контроля. Последний 13-й саммит АСЕП должен был состояться в ноябре прошлого 2020 года в Камбодже, но из-за эпидемии COVID-19 перенесен на 4-й квартал этого 2021 года. Совет Федерации в качестве члена наблюдателя также принимает активное участие в работе Ассоциации государств Юго-Восточной Азии АИПА. Это парламентское объединение является составной неотъемлемой частью Ассоциации государств Юго-Восточной Азии, то есть межпарламентским форумом стран, членов АСЕАН. Все эти весомые парламентские организации играют ключевую роль в развитии взаимодействия по линии Россия-АСЕАН. Республика Филиппины занимает важное место в этих организациях. Филиппины можно назвать фактически основоположницей Ассоциации государств Юго-Восточной Азии, которая является парламентским форумом Ассоциации государств Юго-Восточной Азии АСЕАН. В 1977 году в городе Маниле на Филиппинах был утвержден статут Межпарламентской организации АСЕАН, которая 30 лет спустя при непосредственном участии Республики Филиппины была преобразована в Ассоциацию государств Юго-Восточной Азии АИПА. Знаем, что Республика Филиппины всегда родила за продвижение и укрепление парламентской составляющей форума АСЕАН. Я успела заметить, что в следующем 2022 году форуму АИПА также исполнится 45 лет, как и российско-филиппинским дипломатическим отношениям в этом году. Считаю это хорошим знаком. Текущий год отмечен еще одним важным юбилеем. Диалогу Россия-АСЕАН исполняется 25 лет. За прошедшие годы наше сотрудничество было выведено на высший уровень, обзавелось солидной договорно-правовой базой и эффективными рабочими механизмами, что позволяет конструктивно решать самые серьезные вопросы. В августе 2019 года я принимала участие в работе юбилейной 40-й Генассамблеи Межпарламентской ассамблеи Ассоциации государств Юго-Восточной Азии АИПА, которая проходила в Бангкоке. Мероприятие было посвящено теме укрепления парламентского сотрудничества в интересах устойчивого развития сообщества АСЕАН. На пленарном заседании АИПА я отметила, что центральная задача парламентского сообщества заключается в формировании позитивной созидательной повестки, способствующей повышению доверия между государствами. Недопустимо использование языка санкций в отношении парламентариев, избранных представителей от народа, на которых возложена ответственность за ведение открытого беспристрастного диалога. Я также отметила прогресс между Россией и странами АСЕАН в экономической сфере, подтвердила готовность России наращивать сотрудничество в высокотехнологичных и инновационных отраслях, делиться опытом в сфере интеграции удаленных территорий, содействуя росту их экономик, совершенствованию систем образования и здравоохранения. Я также проинформировала парламентариев АСЕАН о принятых в России программах по развитию Дальнего Востока, направленных на привлечение инвестиций в регион. Я рекомендовала налаживать связи по парламентской линии с другими ведущими региональными структурами, включая Шанхайскую организацию сотрудничества ШОС и Евразийский экономический союз, с целью формирования дополнительных инструментов сотрудничества на пространстве Большой Евразии. 13-15 октября 2021 года в Санкт-Петербурге, в России, под эгидой Совета Федерации запланировано проведение 3-го Евразийского женского форума, к участию в котором можно было бы привлечь и женский форум АИПА. В целях расширения контакта с парламентариями стран АСЕАН я пригласила стороны к большему взаимодействию в рамках старейшей в мире парламентской организации Межпарламентского союза МПС, объединяющего парламенты 193 стран мира. Это важная мировая площадка для парламентариев по согласованию позиций в вопросах, представляющих всеобщий интерес. Не могу не отметить то внимание, которое в Совете Федерации уделяется развитию парламентских связей с Сенатом Конгресса Республики Филиппины. В 1994 году на основании соответствующего меморандума о сотрудничестве, подписанного в Маниле, были сформированы парламентские группы дружбы между Советом Федерации и Сенатом Конгресса Республики Филиппины. В Государственной Думе, Нижней Палате Российского парламента сформирована объединенная депутатская группа по связям с парламентами Республики Индонезии, Королевства Таиланд, Малайзии, Республики Сингапур и Республики Филиппины. Хотела бы особо подчеркнуть, что у нас в Совете Федерации создана отдельная группа по сотрудничеству с Сенатом Конгресса Филиппин. Российскую часть группы дружбы в Совете Федерации я возглавляю с мая 2019 года. В нашу группу входит 20 сенаторов, практически от каждого региона России, всего 85 регионов, и от каждого комитета Совета Федерации, всего 10 комитетов. Это одна из самых многочисленных парламентских групп дружбы в Совете Федерации. Уверена, что подобный формат взаимодействия на уровне парламентов наших стран вносит ощутимый вклад в развитие всего комплекса отношений между Российской Федерацией и Республикой Филиппины, которые носят дружественный и взаимовыгодный характер. У нас большие перспективы для продолжения наращивания двухсторонних контактов, в том числе по парламентской линии. Значительный импульс развитию двухсторонних отношений между нашими странами придала двухсторонняя встреча президента Российской Федерации Владимира Владимировича Путина и президента Республики Филиппины Родриго Дутерте на полях саммита форума Азиатско-Тихоокеанского экономического сотрудничества в Лиме в ноябре 2016 года, а также в ходе 2 официальных визитов президента Филиппин Родриго Дутерте в Россию в 2017-2019 годах. К сожалению, пандемия коронавируса не обошла стороной и интенсивность нашего межпарламентского взаимодействия. Знаю, как на Филиппинах до сих пор сохраняется режим чрезвычайной ситуации в связи с COVID-19. Это очень досадно. В то же время считаю важным, что в марте этого года власти вашей страны одобрили российскую вакцину от коронавируса «Спутник Ви». Надеемся, что с помощью вакцинации большинства населения удастся стабилизировать эпидемиологическую обстановку в вашей стране. До пандемии межпарламентские контакты России и Филиппин развивались по нарастающей и достаточно динамично. Так, председатель Совета Федерации Валентина Ивановна Матвиенко посетила Манилу с официальным визитом в 2014 году. В 2015 году в России с ответным визитом находился тогдашний председатель Сената Конгресса Республики Филиппины Франклин Дрилон. В 2017 году в Санкт-Петербурге для участия в 137-й Ассамблее Межпарламентского союза побывал бывший председатель Сената Филиппин, ныне председатель Комитета по международным отношениям Сената Кока Пиментель. В июле 2019 года на полях глобального саммита «Женщины. Переосмысление успеха» в городе Базель, Швейцария, состоялась моя встреча с руководством крупных филиппинских предприятий, объединяющих свыше 100 крупных корпораций страны, а также сети деловых женщин Филиппин, чья деятельность направлена на защиту интересов женщин, предпринимателей, руководителей предприятий Филиппин, в советах директоров которых участвуют женщины. В ходе встречи мы обсудили проблемы финансового и экономического положения Филиппин, наиболее приоритетные направления развития страны, которые требуют привлечения капиталов и механизмов, главным образом политического воздействия. Это строительство и развитие жилищной инфраструктуры, развитие промышленного и энергетического комплекса, подготовка специалистов в этих областях, расширение сотрудничества в области культуры, туризма и сельского хозяйства, в том числе рыбной отрасли. В том же году, в июле 2019 года, у меня состоялась встреча с послом Республики Филиппины в России господином Карлосом Саретой. Во встрече активное участие приняли почти все члены российской группы дружбы. Они представили промышленный, экономический, культурный и образовательный потенциал регионов России, который они представляют в Совете Федерации. В ходе встречи представитель Республики Башкортостан в Совете Федерации выступил с предложением о создании побратимских связей города Уфы с одним из филиппинских городов и о совместном развитии пчеловодства. От Ивановской, Астраханской областей и Республики Бурятия поступили предложения о подготовке филиппинских специалистов по профильным специальностям, таким как энергетика, сельское хозяйство, транспортная и строительная инфраструктура, рыбопромышленная отрасль. Я, в свою очередь, выказала готовность Совета Федерации оказывать всемирную поддержку филиппинским парламентариям в формировании соответствующей законодательной базы для обеспечения эффективного выполнения инвестиционных российско-филиппинских проектов. Недавно, 23 марта, в ходе онлайн-конференции по инвестиционному климату на Филиппинах «Сделаем это реальностью на Филиппинах», приглашение на которую Совет Федерации было любезно направлено послом Филиппин в России господином Карлосом Суретой, рада была услышать, что филиппинская сторона вступила на путь преобразований, значительно улучшающих инвестиционный климат в стране. Сформирована новая законодательная база в сфере инвестиционной политики и налогового регулирования. Уверена, качественное законодательство будет способствовать сохранению гарантий и повышению инвестиционной привлекательности вашей страны. Учитывая широкий интерес наших законодателей друг к другу, а также большие перспективы сотрудничества между нашими странами, мы всегда рады возобновлению контактов на самом высоком парламентском уровне. Позвольте поблагодарить организаторов столь важного мероприятия Центр ASEAN при МГИМО МИД России. Большое спасибо за внимание и мои самые искренние пожелания филиппинским участникам и парламентариям.
Labaeva for expression of her full support for this conference from the very beginning, and also to the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation for this contribution. Ms. Labaeva spoke about several dimensions of our interparliamentary cooperation, the direct contacts between parliamentarians of our countries, then about their cooperation within multilateral frameworks, and also about the contribution of our regions to the development of relations between Russia and the Philippines through the interparliamentary ties. Now let me pass the floor to Mr. Alan Peter Karetana, whom MGIMO was privileged to host as a guest speaker when he was the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines in 2017 and 2018. So Mr. Alan Peter Karetana, please, the screen is yours for your talk.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's an honor and privilege to be with us today and to be with everyone today. And, you know, as I reflect on the last 5 years, on the huge leaps in the relationship between the Russian Federation and the Philippines, I reflect on the biblical verse that tells us, whatever you sow, you will reap. Or in Filipino, kung ano yung tatanim, yan ang yung aanihin. And the emphasis really was on the relationship, where our two presidents, President Rodrigo Duterte and President Putin, made it a more special relationship by really having a desire for a more intimate interaction between the Russian people and the Filipino people. So if you look at the last 45 years, I dare say that the last 5 years have really bore fruit. Yes, we have been planting good relations for decades, but we saw how much it grew in the last 5 years. And I think if we have a countdown to our 50th year anniversary in the next 5 years, we can even grow more exponentially. And on that note, I'd just like to really thank Foreign Minister Lavrov during the time that I was also in the Foreign Ministry, because his attitude was simple. Nothing is too small or too big among friends. and he took out any barriers in discussing any issues, whether it will be Filipinos in Russia, whether it be about peculiar situations of Russian or Filipinos in Russia or Russians in the U.S. In the Philippines, whether it be about the growth of the relationship of the Russian Orthodox Church and the Philippine counterparts, the Philippine representatives of the Roman Catholic Church or our evangelical churches, no? So in fact, whether it be in the UN or in the visit of President Duterte to Russia, Foreign Minister Lavrov and all his colleagues always gave us more than enough time to develop the personal relations. So moving forward, that's what I also would like to propose in the interparliamentary relations. While it is true, Madam said it very right that COVID-19 interrupted many activities that could have helped us grow. The COVID also gave us a lot of opportunities because before, you know, especially because we have elections every 3 years, and for the Congress of the Philippines only has a 3-year term and can only be allowed 2 re-elections, while the Senate has a 6-year term and 1 re-election, so 12 years. So usually it was the Senate. In fact, my first visit to the Russia is when I was a first-term senator. But now, because of technology and the situation, I think parliamentarians would not mind having a good Zoom meeting or using the internet to grow their personal relationships and learn more about the countries, you know. And as we learn more about the countries, I'd first like to really thank very much former Ambassador Igor Kovayev, you know, in everything he did to enhance the understanding between Moscow and Manila. And of course, I'd like to greet His Excellency Ambassador Marat Pavlov for the innovations and for everything he's been doing despite the situation of COVID-19 in Manila. He continues to work hard to improve our relations. And of course, Ambassador Carlos King Sureta, when I entered the foreign ministry, I remember Ambassador King was telling me how he's been working hard for decades to bring Russia and Philippines together. And we're so much alike. You know, we rely heavily on institution and protocol. But the reality is our relationship is driven by a personal friendship and personalities. So I think that's one thing that's very important also in both the diplomatic relations and in the interparliamentary relations, that yes, we observe protocol and we have institutional arrangement, mechanisms, exchanges, but it's actually the personal friendships, no, that really strengthen our relationship. And then, of course, let me also thank Deputy Foreign Minister Igor Morgulov, who I had the opportunity to always sit beside, whether it's in ASEAN or in our meetings in Russia, and Undersecretary, of course, Elizabeth Buensuceso, who shepherded much of the relationship between ASEAN and our partners, Russia. But let me end with two statements. That first, you know, the growth of our relationship under Duterte was also, President Duterte and President Putin, was also driven by a desire to have a very close bilateral relationship and a clear statement to other countries that you are also our friends, but please do not interfere with our relationship between each other. So the relationship of the Philippines with the Russian Federation is between the Philippines and Russia, and it's not a concern of other countries. And that's one reason that we really grew. Secondly, any relationship, as long as it's beneficial, mutually beneficial, especially for governments that want their people to have a better life, will grow with, of course, better economic and social ties. So may I also propose, you know, it's easy to remember when we need money, we run to the ATM or the automatic teller machine. So also looking at our relationship and looking back, there's much that we can do with A, agriculture, T, tourism, and M, manufacturing. Russia has always offered us much in the area of manufacturing when we talked about developing our military and also with the vaccine, Sputnik V. It was offered to us that you will share technology and grow it here and also be able to manufacture it here. I'll add another M, mineral resource development. Russia being, a very big and of course a very developed country has much to offer if we try to develop our mineral industry, but at the same time protect our environment. So there's much to say and much to celebrate, but I'm really looking forward to the next 5 years and to a closer relationship and using COVID not as a challenge, but rather as an opportunity to have more forums like this and more understanding and maybe may I end by really, I know both Russia and the Philippines believe that the youth is our future. So really more exchanges, more students from Russia to the Philippines and more Filipinos studying in Russia and more exchanges between our universities and educational institutions, I think will really lay a good foundation to our future. God bless, and again, thank you to everyone in this forum today.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And that's very interesting that you mentioned the youth in the very end of your talk. Speaking about dismantling stereotypes, and please, our senior colleagues, forgive me, but I will tell you right now that we very warm remember your talk here in MGIMO to our students and to us, the staff. And you actually was pretty much the first one to show us the face of young Filipino diplomats and political leaders. And that was so remarkable that many people still remember your talk here. So thank you very much once again for finding time to join us today. We do hope that the next, not 5, but hopefully next couple of years will bring us closer together, either in Moscow or in the Philippines. And at this moment, let me close topic on the interparliamentary cooperation and pass the floor back to Ms. Lu for, well, people-to-people contacts and cooperation, which must be very interesting, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Ekaterina. Indeed, this is an interesting topic. Cultural cooperation is a long-standing pillar of Philippine-Russia ties. In fact, it paved the way for the formal establishment of diplomatic ties. It may well be argued, actually, that the Philippines and the then Soviet Union used culture deliberately and strategically to break barriers between the two countries, real and imagined. And this was way before cultural diplomacy and soft power became mainstream concepts in international relations. So we are very excited to know how far we've gone in maximizing culture and people-to-people exchanges in order to put bilateral relations on a more solid ground for growth and expansion. Our first speaker on this topic is the Director General of the Foreign Service Institute of the Philippines, the Honorable Jose Maria A. Carino. A career diplomat, DG Carino served as chair of the Technical Cooperation Council of the Philippines and Assistant Secretary for Cultural Diplomacy from 2011 to 2014. DG Carino is an award-winning author on Philippine history and art. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lou. Warm greetings to all. I am truly grateful to the MGIMO University for inviting me to speak in this prestigious panel. And I'd like to quote my good friend, King Soreta, times have changed. But let me add, times have changed for the good. Let me just give you a concrete example of this. You know, in 1492, the Emir Boabdil in Granada, Spain, had to leave Granada in a ship after having been defeated by Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic kings of Spain. And his mother told him, you cry like a woman over something you did not fight for like a man. And in the same year, 1492, Columbus went to America. Let's fast forward. In 1521, Magellan arrived in the Philippines. And historians today have changed. They no longer say that Columbus discovered America because the Vikings arrived there first. And from the other side, probably Eastern people came through the land bridges of Alaska. And things have changed even for the Philippines, because when the Spaniards arrived here, they saw the same Muslims, the same Moors that were thrown out of Spain by the Catholic kings, which means Magellan didn't discover us, which also means that we were trading with all the neighboring countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Siam, which is now Thailand, China. So things have changed. And now the Americans came after Spain, and they were with us for almost 40 years. And in those 40 years, it is said that after almost 400 years of being in the convents of Spain, we had 40 years of Hollywood. But the American influence did not stop Russia to prove itself worthy of coming to our shores to show off their culture. War and Peace and Anna Karenina by Lev Tolstoy has been read by my generation. The same thing with Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. Unforgettable novels by really good Russian authors and novelists. I myself am a painter, and my influences are the avant-garde painters, avant-garde Russian artists, Vasily Kandinsky, Popova, Mark Chagall, and of course, Kazimir Malevich. And while I paint, I listen to Prokofiev, I listen to Mussorgsky, Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, and other Russian composers. And no matter what, Russia has influenced our artists here in the Philippines. And I'm not just talking about art. I'm also talking about music. I'm talking about dance. And all of this will be expounded on by somebody who knows more about it than me. So let me call Mr. Edwin Estrada, who is our senior researcher from this Foreign Service Institute. And he will narrate the story of our friendship, rooted in our mutual regard for building bridges through culture. Edwin,
thank you.
Please take over.
Thank you very much, Director General Carino. I think there's no more appropriate person to open this this session than Director General Carino, who I believe really values culture and the arts in promoting deeper relations between states. Allow us to share our presentation. We have prepared a PowerPoint presentation for this sharing. Okay. A shared cultural history is the foundation of a dynamic cultural cooperation. So our presentation explores just that. The seeds of our friendship, milestones of the present, and the hope for deeper cultural relationship in the future. We are celebrating 45 years of friendship between our two countries, which began with the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between the Philippines and the USSR in 1976. However, I wish to emphasize that at the outset, contacts between Filipinos and Russians go back a long way. Scholars note that Russian interest in the Philippines can be traced back to the 16th century, when Russian intellectuals took note of the discovery of the archipelago for the Spanish crown by Ferdinand Magellan in 1521. The Russians watched local developments in the Philippines with keen interest, considering it an important point of reference in understanding European colonial power politics in Asia and as an entry point to possible trade in the region. In 1813, an American trader, Peter Dobell, submitted to the Russian government a plan to arrange a regular food supply for its possessions in the Far East by establishing a regular Russo-Philippine trade. Tsar Alexander I approved the proposal in 1816, and the Russian government set up a consulate general in Manila, the first Russian diplomatic mission in Southeast Asia. Dobell was appointed consul general, but Spain's refusal to recognize him and the ensuing political negotiations resulted in his status being lowered to quote-unquote unofficial representative of the Russian government, starting in 1820. The mission was closed in 1826 and it was not reopened until 1890, and only at vice-consulate level headed by foreign businessmen. The beginning of the 20th century saw a Russia embroiled in the Russo-Japanese War, the First World War, and the Socialist Revolution. Meanwhile, the United States took over the Philippines in 1902 after the Philippine-American War. Thus, Russia and the Philippines simply did not have the opportunity to work on establishing diplomatic ties. During the interim years of peace, however, a milestone event took place that sparked Filipino interest in Russia, its people and culture. In 1908, Manuel L. Quezon, then the floor leader of the First Philippine Assembly, was appointed by the U.S. government as Philippine delegate to the International Congress on Navigation in St. Petersburg. He was accompanied by Teodoro M. Calao and F. Theo Rogers of the Philippine Free Press. Since the Congress, the reason for their trip had ended a week before, the three decided to just tour the cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg. In his autobiography, Aide de Camp to Frida, Calao recounts that they spent most of their time, quote, doing rounds of Moscow and St. Petersburg. We attended sessions of the Duma. We admired the grandeur of buildings, the wealth of the museums. We entered the churches. We prostrated ourselves before the icons, unquote. Out of his memorable trip, Calao wrote the book Hacia la Tierra del Tsar, Towards the Land of the Tsar, a lengthy account that brought Russia to the attention of Filipino intellectuals, academics, and the reading public. His work was greatly appreciated by local and foreign critics. Wenceslao y Retana, a famous Spanish writer, gave the book glowing praise in Madrid. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union sent delegates to international conferences in Manila, and Filipinos began to take part in international seminars and training programs held in the USSR. Soon, there was talk about the Soviet Union's willingness to recognize the Philippines as soon as the Philippines is ready to establish relations. The Philippines sent one congressional delegation after another to Moscow on a fact-finding mission. Although diplomatic relations were not immediately established, bilateral ties in various fields were quite extensive, and this is according to the Soviet scholar and linguist Valentin Marakenko. The Soviets encouraged visits by Filipino officials, businessmen, labor leaders, dance troupes, and individual tourists to Moscow. In turn, they sent their own government officials, scientists, scholars, labor leaders, and journalists. In March 1972, President Marcos sent Mrs. Imelda Marcos on a special mission to the Soviet Union to discuss the establishment of diplomatic, trade, and cultural relations, and the Soviets considered this visit a landmark in Philippine-Soviet relations. Shortly after Mrs. Marcos returned to the Philippines, a Philippine-USSR Friendship Society was officially launched, with Minister of Labor Blas Ople as chairman. The members of the society included almost all well-known writers, scholars, and academics of the Philippines. It was through this friendship society that extensive contacts between the two countries were carried out before there were formal diplomatic relations. 2 years later, the society's counterpart was organized in Moscow under the aegis of the Union of Soviet Societies for Friendship and Cultural Relations with Foreign Countries. These two societies were highly responsible for paving the way to establishing diplomatic ties through reciprocal exchanges of socio-cultural programs that helped much in easing local prejudices, fears, and suspicions. Wrote then Undersecretary Manuel Collantes, the strongest impact of the new contact between the Philippines and the USSR was made in the arts. The first Soviet envoys in arts to come to the Philippines were members of the world-famous Bolshoi Theater Company, the Berezovska Dance Company, and such performing groups as the Yunost and Kabardinka ensembles. From the Philippine end, the Bayanihan Dance Company, the Filipinescas Dance Company, and the Madrigal Chamber Choir went to Moscow. The playwright Rolando Tino went there to Moscow to work on an anthology of Soviet poetry. Filipino conductor Redentor Romero of the Philippine Philharmonic Orchestra also undertook a series of 23 performances in Moscow and other Soviet cities. The foundation for Philippine-Soviet ties were quietly being worked out beneath these visible cultural contacts. And on the 2nd of June, 1976, President Ferdinand E. Marcos and Supreme Soviet Presidium President Nikolai Podgorny signed the communique which spelled out the official establishment of diplomatic relations. An agreement on cultural cooperation was signed by Mrs. Marcos and Minister of Foreign Affairs Andrei Gromyko on 7th of July 1978. Mrs. Marcos visited Moscow in July 1982 to attend the Tchaikovsky competition in which Filipino pianist Rowena Arrieta was a finalist. USSR Deputy Minister of Culture and President of the USSR Philippine Friendship Society, Mamara Globovtsova, observed that it is in the field of culture that bilateral relations between the two countries develop at the most rapid rate. Mrs. Marcos cited the friendship societies for their valuable work in promoting friendly relations and for being the foundation of the growth of bilateral ties. In June 1985, the Soviets honored Lucrecia Casilag, a leading Filipino composer and head of the Philippine Cultural Center, with the Avicenna Prize for her achievements in the field of culture and cultural understanding. The Casilag Award highlighted the efforts of the Soviets, and to a large extent, also the Philippines, to further cement the RP-USSR relations through culture. Now let's move forward to the present. We are happy to note the continued intensification of cultural and people-to-people cooperation between the Philippines and Russia through the decades. The Philippine Embassy in Moscow has been strengthening its cultural diplomacy program by organizing activities annually that highlight Philippine music, dance, literature, food, fashion, and crafts. The Embassy's annual celebration of Philippine Independence Day, as well as the ASEAN Reception Day, have always been an opportunity to celebrate and showcase Filipino culture. The Philippines' efforts at increasing people-to-people exchanges between the Philippines and Russia go hand in hand with promoting travel and tourism. We have been participating, for instance, in the annual Moscow International Travel and Tourism Exhibition in Moscow, and this is one of the top 5 travel exhibitions in the world, participated in by more than 100 countries from different regions. The Philippine delegation, led by the Philippine Department of Tourism, is composed of domestic travel and tour operators, as well as hotel and resort representatives. At this point, let me highlight how our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, becomes a relevant cultural link between our two countries. Our National Commission for Culture and the Arts, or NCCA, chairman is Felipe M. De Leon, together with Ambassador Soreta, unveiled a sculpture of the bust of Dr. Jose Rizal at the Philippine Embassy in Moscow on December 11, 2015. The ceremony was a celebration of the life and work of the country's most revered hero. A number of academic literature on Rizal had already been published in Russia, starting in 1937, when Alexander Guber's essay appeared in the series Life of a Remarkable People. And this is decades before the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Philippines and Russia. Also, Rizal's two novels, El Filibusterismo and Noli Me Tangere, were translated into Russian and published in 1937 and 1963, respectively. The most extensive and seminal body of work on Rizal actually belonged to renowned Philippine expert and Rizalista, Dr. Igor Podberetsky, who wrote the book Evolution of the Artistic Path of Jose Rizal, and this was published in 1982. This demonstrates that Rizal's contribution to Philippine and world culture and political thought cannot be denied. 3 years after he came out with a biography of Jose Rizal, Dr. Podberetsky, fluent in Tagalog, was awarded the Presidential Medal of Merit by President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo in 2009. Now let's discuss more recent cultural activities, specifically Days of Philippine Culture in Russia in 2017 and the Prodexpo in 2020. In accordance with the Protocol on Cooperation between the National Commission on Culture and the Arts of the Philippines and the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation for 2014 to 2016, the Days of Philippine Culture in Russia was held on September 26 to October 1, 2017 in the cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg. The Philippine delegation was composed of Ballet Manila led by Ms. Liza Macuja Elizalde, the award-winning Philippine Women's University Jose Abad Santos Memorial School Rondalia Group, and soprano Ms. Bianca Camille Lopez. The gala performance was held at the Ruskaya Pensnya Theater in Moscow on September 27. The event was formally opened by Ambassador Carlos D. Soreta and Minister for Culture Alexander Vladimirovich Zuravsky. From Moscow, the Philippine delegation went to St. Petersburg to perform at the historic Tovstonogov Russian State Academic Bolshoi Drama Theater, or BDT, on September 29. The concert program was attended by more than 200 locals and Filipinos residing in the city. The two shows garnered positive feedback from the Russian audience. Recent years have seen an even more intensified promotion of Filipino cuisine, fashion, and arts in Russia. Top officials of St. Petersburg, Russia's second largest city, as well as its leading business people, academe, media, and its consular corps were treated to an evening of Philippine tourist attractions, culture, cuisine, and drinks at the reception hosted by the Philippine Embassy in Russia in 2019. Displayed during the reception were crafts and fabrics made from natural materials and created by Filipino artisans. The reception featured cultural dances by the Philippine Embassy Cultural Performing Group, reflected the colorful and diverse culture of the Philippines, as well as the innate talent and artistry of the Filipino people. This cultural performing group is composed of members of the Filipino community in Moscow. As for Prodexpo 2020, the Philippine Embassy exhibited the interest of many visitors because of greater awareness in Russia and of the Philippines. Ambassador Soreta observed, "There is greater knowledge now of our country, our people, history, art, and culture, as well as our various products. This is a result of our closer relations and the efforts of both the Philippines and Russia to better understand each other." Prodexpo is Russia's largest trade show in terms of exhibition space, professional interest, and market coverage. Now let's go on to academic exchanges. One important element of the relationship between Philippines and Russia is in the area of academic exchange. In September 2015, Ambassador Soreta visited the Institute of Asian and African Studies of the Moscow State University and met with Director Igor Abilgazil, who stated that his visit signifies a new stage in the cooperative relationship between the IAAS and the Philippine Embassy. He expressed appreciation for the embassy's efforts in facilitating the IAAS's internship program for its Filipino majors in the Philippines and promoting other forms of academic exchanges. We must acknowledge Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov for an excellent initiative, the Global Forum of Young Diplomats, that brings together young diplomats from all over the world and foster greater communication and understanding among the future leaders of the respective countries. Our young Filipino diplomats actively participated in the second forum in Sochi in 2018, and they expressed appreciation for the opportunity to establish linkages with their counterparts from Russia, ASEAN, the Middle East, and Africa. The Philippine Embassy has also organized its own Russian language class for the Filipino community in Russia to promote better understanding and people-to-people relations between us. Filipino students in Russia conducted free Russian language lessons for Filipinos in Russia at the embassy, where they were taught the basics, from writing in Cyrillic script to pronouncing Russian vowels and consonants properly and counting in Russia. The Foreign Service Institute of the Philippines has itself been instrumental in the deepening of relations by, for instance, sending civil servants to the Moscow State University for an intensive Russian language and culture course. For this, we are grateful for the funding provided by the Philippine Congress. In fact, one of our senior researchers in the Institute is currently pursuing a master's degree in strategic and arms control studies at St. Petersburg State University under a full Russian government scholarship. We are happy to inform our audience today that despite the immense challenges brought about by the current pandemic, the Institute completed its first full online course on basic Russian language, conducted from August to November of last year, with 23 participants from the DFA Home Office, consular offices, and other government agencies. We will not allow COVID-19 to be a hindrance to our efforts at providing the relevant training needed by our government workers to fulfill their duties. Now, at this point, I would like to give the floor back to Director General Carino for some additional insights. DG Carino.
Yes, thank you very much, Edwin. You know, several months ago, I talked to Ambassador Marat and proposed a way of improving the Russian language capabilities of FSI so that the DFA officers and staff, as well as other diplomats from the Philippines going to Russia, will have language courses here at FSI. And I am hoping that the Russian government will study our proposal with kindness and with a good eye so that we can implement it as soon as possible. The details are already with Ambassador Marat, and my good friend has told me that, you know, this is something that's really interesting. So let's put words into action so that Russia and the Philippines become closer. Thank you very much to everybody, and a very pleasant good morning and good afternoon, my dear friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General Carino, for the very comprehensive discussion on the history of Philippines-Russia cultural and people-to-people ties. Indeed, cultural cooperation has been sustained over the past 4 decades under the protocol between the NCCA and Mincultura and the respective initiatives of the Embassy of the Philippines in Moscow and the Embassy of Russia in Manila. And I am glad that the presentation mentioned academic exchanges and language training, because this is one area where the impact of cooperation is long-term and strategic. Unfortunately, we also, from the Philippine perspective, we lag behind in this area. As I've said before, and as mentioned by His Excellency Igor Morgulov, Moscow State University and St. Petersburg University, they have full-fledged Philippine Studies program that has produced graduates and scholars who are very well versed in Russian, in Philippine history, culture, and language for several decades already. And we have no counterpart in the Philippines. It is great news indeed that FSI has instituted a Russian language course for DFA and other government employees, and is has sent already an employee to MGU for an intensive Russian language course. This is, of course, a step in the right direction, but a very preliminary one, and we should really push forward in bolstering cooperation in this area. Now, to give us the Russian perspective, we have with us Dr. Andrei Baikov, Vice Rector of for Science and Research of the MGIMO University, who will deliver the remarks of His Excellency Anatoly Torkunov, Director of MGIMO University. He was supposed to join us today, but could not because of some urgent matters. Mr. Vice Rector, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lu. Dear Director General Carino, dear guests, distinguished colleagues, friends, as was already pointed out, Rector Torkunov was willing to participate today, but unfortunately he was summoned to a different event, which is running in parallel. But he entrusted me as his deputy in charge of research and international relations to present remarks on his behalf at today's conference. First of all, I would like to emphasize how happy I am to speak on this particular session, because it is dedicated to something that universities are actively engaged in promoting, and that is people-to-people contacts and humanitarian cooperation. The cultural diversity of Russia and the Philippines exhibit endless opportunities from the humanitarian point of view in terms of advancing humanitarian exchanges. And it applies not just to culture or education or science or research, but also to entrepreneurial and innovative initiatives that young people very often come up with. And it is no accident that there are those who most often start new enterprises and are so known for lucrative startups. Yet the COVID-19 pandemic that has been circulating globally for almost a year and a half, and will soon be nearing its second year, is obviously affecting almost every aspect of our day-to-day activities. And that unfortunately includes our human need to experience cultural exchanges and the need to engage in people-to-people interaction. With concerts, theater performances, museums, and other cultural practices postponed, put on hold, or cancelled altogether, it is essential to discuss how Russia and the Philippines can cooperate under these new conditions. The opportunity to reinforce the foundations of our bilateral relations through the promotion of new friendships in the spheres of education and research, art, literature, cultural heritage, and modern-day accomplishments of our countries is duly appreciated and continually explored by MGIMO University. MGIMO cherishes its long-standing relationship with the Philippines and is committed to taking our bilateral relations in this regard even further. We are honored to have established solid partnerships with the leading Filipino universities, research centers, and think tanks, including the Foreign Service Institute of the Philippines, the New Era University, the Ateneo de Manila University, the Development Academy of the Philippines, and the Benilde School of Diplomacy and Governance. We are always happy to welcome our Filipino friends and partners at MGIMO on site, but virtually, of course, at every moment which arises. A number of high-level officials from the Philippines have already visited our university in recent years. In October 2019, MGIMO hosted the President of the Republic of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, who was conferred an honorary doctoral degree. The President met with the university administration and visited the art exhibition of Russian artists entitled To the Islands of Sampaguita. His lecture roused great interest among the university students and professors and was followed by a lively and substantive Q&A session. One of the distinguished guests of the first Russian ASEAN Educational Forum in 2019 was Leonor Briones, Secretary of the Department of Education of the Republic of the Philippines, who participated in the plenary session and delivered welcoming remarks to the forum's participants. In 2018, MGIMO welcomed the former Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, Alan Peter Karetana, who presided over the signing ceremony of the MOU between MGIMO and the New Era University of the Philippines. The subsequent lecture on the foreign policy of the Philippines was attended by MGIMO students and professors, as well as by the representatives of the ASEAN diplomatic missions and Russian MFA officials. One of the truly key milestones of our cooperation with the Philippines was the 5th Russia-ASEAN Youth Summit that took place in Manila in 2019. The event was organized in cooperation with the National Youth Council and brought together students and young professionals from the 10 ASEAN countries as well as Russia. Themed Enhancing People-to-People Connectivity between ASEAN and Russia, the summit sought to enhance the role of youth in raising awareness of the ASEAN and the Russian Federation's dialogue relationships. During the two-day summit, the young delegates had discussions and workshops on education, economy, trade and business exchanges, and cultural understanding, with the resource persons providing significant insights into the best practices in the respective fields for the participants. The summit culminated in the President of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte's invitation of the delegates to the presidential residence. An active part in maintaining close relations with the Filipino partners is played by the ASEAN Centre at MGIMO. Among the prominent Filipino academics and officials who have visited MGIMO at the center's invitation were the late Dr. Alan Ortiz, former president of the Council on Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, whose lecture gave a start to the first course of the public lectures ASEAN Academic Days in 2019. In 2018, a well-known historian and journalist, Professor Ambeth Acampo, delivered a unique lecture on how the Filipino banknotes and coins illuminate the history of the Filipino nation. Another eminent Filipino expert on the regionalism and multilateralism in the Asia-Pacific region, Dr. Mele Caballero Anthony, shared her views on the global security problems during her last visit to MGIMO in 2016. In 2020, she also joined the discussions of the network of ASEAN-Russia think tank, NART. In 2017, the ASEAN Centre held the Philippines Day at MGIMO that was dedicated to the 50th anniversary of ASEAN and to the Philippines chairmanship in the association. Its program included the research seminar on the Russia-Philippines relations with the participation of Dr. Elba Cruz, at that time the president and CEO of the Development Academy of the Philippines, and the signing ceremony of the MOU between MGIMO and the Development Academy of the Philippines. On that occasion, the exposition of rare books and photos collected by Professor Sumski, former director of the ASEAN Centre, entitled From the Philippine Archives, was presented at MGIMO. That same year, at the initiative of the ASEAN Centre, a group of Russian business people visited the Philippines and explored the ways of enhancing Russia-Philippines trade relations. Even in the new post-COVID-19 era, the MGIMO University and the ASEAN Centre continue to promote its relations with the Filipino partners in a new creative way with the use of digital technologies. Dear friends and colleagues, all the above efforts are aimed at building bridges of understanding between our countries, allowing for a greater youth connectivity, reinforcing partnerships, close cooperation, and networking between our nations. Unity is in diversity. So let's move further with exploring each other's rich cultures and unique traditions. With this, permit me once again to express my sincere thanks to all of you for joining us today on this important occasion and for contributing to the Russian-Philippines relationships. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Baikov. Indeed, MGIMO, especially the ASEAN Centre, has been instrumental in connecting our youth and promoting academic exchanges through its cooperation agreements with Philippine higher learning institutions, the Russia-ASEAN Educational Forum, and the network of ASEAN-Russian think tanks, or NART, where the Philippines participates through FSI. To wrap up, both sides recognize the value of cultural and people-to-people exchanges with its limitless scope in deepening overall bilateral ties. The new normal that COVID-19 imposes on all of us presents new modes of cooperation through digital technology, which we should maximize. So now we proceed to the closing ceremony, and I have the pleasure of giving the floor back to Dr. Koldunova.
Thank you very much, Ms. Liu, and well, we're very much happy and privileged to have for concluding remarks Ms. Army Lopez Garcia here with us, the Honorary Consul of the Russian Federation to the Republic of the Philippines, and also the chairperson of the Philippine Russian Business Assembly. And Vice Rector Baikov will present his concluding remarks from the Russian part. Ms. Army, I think, is a very outstanding person in terms of being very much close to the realities of our relations on the ground. So I think that's indeed remarkable to have her here with us. And without very much further ado, Ms. Army, please, could you share your your opinion, your thoughts on what you have heard about our relations during this conference? The screen is yours, ma'am, please. Ms. Army, are you here with us? Could you please unmute your mic and... Okay, let us double check with her. Just a moment, please. Here, it seems that Ms. Army disconnected. So I suggest that we proceed with Vice Rector's remarks, and meanwhile we will try to reconnect Ms. Army back to us again.
Thank you, Dr. Koldunova. Thank you, Ekaterina. Thank you again, dear colleagues, for being with us today. So our today's conference is almost over, is almost finished. So I would like to take this moment to thank you once again from the bottom of my heart for attending, for joining in. It is a great honor and indeed privilege from MGIMO University to host this event in conjunction with our esteemed partner, the Foreign Service Institute of the Republic of the Philippines. It's taking place on the eve of a highly important celebration for our two nations, and that is the 45th anniversary of Russia-Philippines diplomatic relations. At this point, I would like to briefly sum up the discussion's major takeaways. Today, we made an overall assessment of the Russia-Philippines relations' current state and prospects, and touched upon four major topics: political and security dimensions of our interaction, inter-parliamentary relations, which indeed play an increasing role in enhancing our partnership, trade and economic cooperation, and last but obviously not least, people-to-people and cultural ties. Although the time frame of the discussion was limited, it did help us build the solid foundations for future talks, and I hope that future productive discussions will build off of the solid base that we have managed to lay down today during the several hours of very substantive and lively discussions. It is also worth mentioning that today's conference draws upon a series of events commemorating the 45th anniversary of the Russia-Philippines diplomatic relations. One of them is an exposition presenting archival documents, photos of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MGIMO and ASEAN Centre. This exposition is giving a good insight into the development, into the retrospect of the Russia-Philippines relations. Another people-to-people initiative currently underway is a series of Moscow to Manila webinars organized by the Benilde School of Diplomacy and Governance, ASEAN Centre of MGIMO University, and the New Era University. The first webinar in this series was privileged to welcome Ms. Army Lopez Garcia, Honorary Consul of the Russian Federation, and Ms. Liza Makuya Elizalde, prima ballerina and artistic director and CEO of the Ballet Manila, the first foreign soloist to ever join the Mariinsky Ballet Company. We express our deep and profound gratitude to our co-organizer, Foreign Service Institute, for active collaboration and smooth coordination of this event, which helped lead a fruitful discussion. And we are interested in broadening and deepening our cooperation with this distinguished university, this distinguished institution, even further on academic research and people-to-people fronts. We are open to new initiatives from the Foreign Service Institute and other Filipino counterparts, for that matter, with Russian Embassy in the Philippines and the Embassy of the Philippines in the Russian Federation. As we have witnessed today, Russia-Philippines cooperation has bright prospects and we're keen to explore them even further. Last but not least, let me thank all the distinguished speakers and participants, the organizing teams, both at MGIMO and FSI, all those who made this timely event possible and successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Rector. Ms. Army is safely back to us in the virtual domain. Please, Ms. Army, could you unmute yourself and present your concluding remarks?
Thank you very much, Dovidian, and His Excellency, Ambassador Marat Pavlov and Ambassador Carlos Soreta, diplomats, secretaries, fellow speakers, business leaders, and to our efficient moderators, Ms. Ekaterina and Ms. Lu. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Well, we have come to the end of this inspiring, informative, and momentous gathering, the commemoration of the 45th anniversary of Philippine. This is being done at the time, trying to and we're continue to physical transitions to all participants and to get things done. And thank you to MGIMO University of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia, through Rector Anatoly Turkunov, and to our very own Foreign Service Institute of the Republic of the Philippines, headed by Director General Jose Maria Carino, for inviting us to convene and exchange ideas to celebrate the many accomplishments of our decades of bilateral relations and to chart the path of the future. When I think of diplomatic relations between Russia and the Philippines, I do not think about only the past 45 years, but a broader arc of how our cultures cross paths throughout the centuries. There was always a strategic advantage to be gained in our strong relations, and this has been echoed throughout time. It took a while for our spark to take hold. Here we are now, many decades later, in a very different world and in a very different time, with our bilateral relations stronger than ever. We know that. And F angles set Philippine-Russian relations to where it is today. From my own personal experience, I have seen how our relations in modern times have evolved. As a businesswoman, active in many Russian-Philippine trade and cultural efforts since 1996, I believe that the development of better B2B relations of our respective countries could be done by embarking on cultural efforts to bridge the gaps between our countries and pave the way for a better relationship. In 1996, my first project was really a cultural event, a request from the late Russian Ambassador Kuchuk to help the embassy stage an art exhibit in Cebu. And from then on, saw potential of using the cultural route as a catalyst for strengthening our ties. Cultural initiatives have the power to pave the way towards better technological, trade, economic, political, security, interparliamentary, and diplomatic cooperation, which we have discussed just this afternoon. And we also have discussed how people-to-people cooperation could strengthen the bond beyond arrangements at the high level. Cultural efforts present an opportunity to galvanize all these initiatives from the grassroots level up to the governance high ranks. Over the years, I kept reiterating my mantra, a formula of developing stronger ties between countries, which states that culture and tourism breeds better business development and investments been confirmed in the talks earlier. Well, experience. My first question, then I realized that most Filipinos' misconceptions about Russia has been influenced by the Western media and the Hollywood movies. So I thought that something should be done to correct this. So my initiative and project was the Meet Russia, Russian history, culture, lifestyle, and language seminar that was given to the tourism frontliners so that they will understand the that both our cultures have more similarities than differences. And this activity has been supported by the Embassy of the Russian Federation in Manila, the Department of Tourism, and the local government units. Coming soon, I'll just announce to you, coming soon will be the movie To Russia with Love. As a love story of a Russian girl and a Filipino guy whose relationship bloomed as they both discovered that indeed the respective cultures have many similarities. Again, another cultural initiative that will be launched this year. Recently, the PRBA inked an agreement with the Samara University to offer a virtual Russian language instruction. Likewise, it also inked an agreement with the Samara Public Chamber to map out the roadmap for the regional cooperation. So, I say that culture is capable of establishing the right milieu of interaction among Filipinos and Russians, people from all walks of life, seeing the from this cultural bedrock, founded the core team. And this PRBA has organized business forums and B2B ties, and we also inked a partnership and working agreement with the Russian-Philippine Business Council of the Chamber of the Russian Federation, of the Chamber of Commerce of the Russian Federation. And with this partnership, we conduct vetting procedures to ensure that both business nationals will meet the right partners. Now, today, Russia, to aid us in the pandemic, has offered to supply us with a Sputnik V vaccine, which will be available soon to thousands of Filipinos. And this is, of course, an example of the benefits of close cooperation. And we thank Russia for their care and concern. It is also worth noting that the Russian consulate, in cooperation with the Russian embassy in Manila and the Philippine embassy in Moscow, has been instrumental in establishing sisterhood agreements between the Philippine and the Russian regions. So I believe that more regional partnerships should be encouraged. So we are all determined that these leverage agreements between the regional partners, like just to mention one, the agreement between the province of Cebu and St. Petersburg, province of Cebu and Vladimir region, and standing two nationalities. Now, and for that growth reserve his
Here, it seems that Ms. Army has disconnected again, but I think that based from what she has already managed to tell us, there are more and more avenues of cooperation which we haven't even touched during this conference. So I think that at this moment I should thank very thoroughly our counterparts at Foreign Service Institute of the Philippines, or the Republic of the Philippines, and also,
I'm here.
okay, Ms. Army, sorry, we were not aware whether you will be able to reconnect. If you wish, please say a couple of words, and then we will have to conclude.
Just parting words. You know, this celebration is a chance for us to look back at all that we have accomplished together, the many things that we have done to bring our countries closer to each other. However, I believe that the more important and practical, I believe that the more important and practical outcome of this gathering of minds, that it has given us insight into the ways we can reinvent ourselves for the future. And through our present challenges, we have the opportunity to reshape and redefine what Philippine-Russian relations will be in decades to come. Thank you very much. Spasiba большое.
Thank you very much, Ms. Army, and thanks for, well, your very wise and timely ideas that with this conference, of course, we will not change the world, but we will sum up and to point out the areas of our mutual cooperation, of our mutual convergence, and every single participant in his personal capacity, in his professional capacity, will surely try his or her best to proceed with our relations further. So, thanks again to the Foreign Service Institute of the Philippines, to our embassies in Manila and in Moscow, to the respective MPAs and ministries and agencies of Russia and the Philippines. I hope that that was useful, that was, well, let's hope inspiring, and we could do better together. Ms. Lu, would you say a couple of words at the very end, please?
Oh, I would just like to thank MGIMO and FSI for giving me the opportunity to participate in this very, very important forum. It's been very, very enlightening, and it's really a nice feeling to see so many familiar faces, old friends in Moscow, and of course here in the Philippines. Congratulations, FSI and MGIMO. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone, and we will conclude at this moment. Thank you.